Chapter 51. Enough. Put away your cheap tricks that you use to deceive people in the Muggle world. Upon hearing Sherlock's deduction, Snape immediately shifted his piercing gaze from Harry to Sherlock. Holmes, who do you think you are? Guessing what happened here after just a few glances, do you really think you're some famous detective from a novel? It's deduction, not guessing. Snape's icy aura had no effect on Sherlock, who even corrected Snape's wording. Actually, I can indeed offer some assistance with this case. Shut up. I don't have time for your pointless analysis, Holmes. What I want to tell you is. Snape sneered, Gryffindor will be deducted 20 points because of this. Despite the Gryffindor head of house being present, Snape made this decision without hesitation. As soon as he said this, the expressions on the faces of the three, except for Sherlock, immediately turned sour. Especially Hermione. After all, this matter started because of her. As for Professor McGonagall, she was indifferent to Snape's point deduction, as if she had already accepted Snape's actions. However, in the next moment, she suddenly said something that surprised everyone. Mr. Holmes, can you share your thoughts? Professor McGonagall. Snape turned to her abruptly, are you sure you want to listen to a little, first-year student pontificate? I think it would be better to give him detention for a while. Thank you, Professor Snape, I know very well what I'm doing. Professor McGonagall looked at Snape calmly. Mr. Holmes is a student in my house, and I am willing and have a responsibility to listen to his opinion. After saying this, she turned to Sherlock again. Mr. Holmes, you may begin. This is a premeditated case. Under the intense scrutiny of the three professors and three classmates, Sherlock didn't waste any time and went straight to the point. The one who left this blood message is a man, less than 6 feet tall, middle-aged, and right-handed. He is agile, cunning, but currently troubled. Doing this was not his original intention but was at the behest of another person. In addition, he should be using a wand of about 9 inches. Enough. Sherlock spoke faster and faster, and the expressions on the faces of the audience grew more and more surprised as they listened to his eloquent words. Finally, an abrupt voice interrupted his statement, that's enough. Snape looked at Sherlock coldly, speaking with undisguised contempt and disgust. Oh, the great detective Holmes? I already said, put away your boring tricks. Maybe you can rely on it in the Muggle world, but in the magical world. Snape's eyes suddenly became deep. I advise you to be careful. After saying this, he paused, and then said as if he suddenly remembered something, Gryffindor, deduct 10 points as punishment for your nonsense in front of a professor. Upon hearing Snape's words, Harry, Hermione, and Ron were immediately shocked. If the previous point deduction was a punishment for running around, then this was simply an act of rage. It's you who's talking nonsense. This is clearly a rule you made up on the spot. However, the other party was a professor after all, and even if they were indignant in their hearts, the three dared not express it. Otherwise, they would definitely be met with even harsher point deductions. After all, Snape had always been so unreasonable. So the three of them invariably turned their attention to Professor McGonagall. Faced with this point deduction reason that was obviously made up on the spot, McGonagall, known for her justice and fairness, should not be able to stand it and speak up, right? What's more, she's still the head of Gryffindor. Unexpectedly, McGonagall looked at Sherlock and said, word by word. I am very disappointed in you. As soon as these words were spoken, the hearts of the three of Harry instantly fell to the bottom. How could this be? It seems, this time Sherlock's performance made Professor McGonagall too dissatisfied. That's right. After all, although Sherlock pretended to be very confident, those details sounded too unbelievable. Even they, who had seen Sherlock's abilities many times, still found it hard to believe. Not to mention McGonagall, who doesn't know Sherlock very well. But, no matter what, deducting points just because of this is too much, right? Unexpectedly, Professor Quirrell, who looked so weak, suddenly said weakly. Professor, there is no such rule for deducting points. The three suddenly lit up and looked at Quirrell with gratitude. At this moment, even the smell of garlic on his body didn't seem so pungent anymore. But in the next moment, Snape ruthlessly retorted. My rule is the rule. Quirrell. That's not all. After saying this, Snape looked at Quirrell coldly and continued to output. Also, what you should be doing now is getting back as soon as possible. Quirrell. Seeing that even a professor had succumbed to Snape's power, how dare Harry and the others act presumptuously. Only Sherlock remained unmoved, but instead showed a thoughtful expression. McGonagall pretended not to see the scene and said to Sherlock and the other three. If you are not injured, you should go back to Gryffindor Tower as soon as possible. The students are enjoying the Halloween feast in their respective houses. Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. On the way back to Gryffindor Tower, Ron was almost driven mad. Snape is too much. What kind of reason is that? I bet you, he definitely made it up on the spot. Harry and Hermione nodded repeatedly. After the troll incident, the barrier between Harry and Ron and Hermione had been eliminated. At this time, facing Snape, a common enemy, the three reached a united front and accused him in unison. Even Hermione, who always respected professors, was no exception. But to the surprise of the three, Sherlock said at this time, actually, Professor Snape is a good person. Hey! The three turned their heads together and looked at Sherlock with shocked eyes. He said seriously, to be precise, Professor Snape is a despicable but kind person. Sherlock, how did you put these two words together? Hermione stared at Sherlock with wide eyes, expressing her incomprehension. The part of speech of these two words are not opposite, why can't they be put together? Faced with Sherlock's question, Hermione was stunned. Indeed, kindness and despicableness are indeed not antonyms. But, putting them together, whether it's reading them or listening to them, feels weird, okay? Ron also reluctantly asked Sherlock why he didn't bring him and Harry when he went to find Hermione. Then Sherlock told him that he was worried that they would delay the time to save people. Ron looked bitter. You are really honest. I said, in most cases I won't lie, unless necessary. I really thank you for your honesty. In this way, the few people talked and chatted, and finally came to the portrait of the fat lady. Chapter 52. It was the eve of Halloween. News of the troll's demise had spread, and the Gryffindor common room was packed with young wizards. The little lions, already gathered for a feast, were even more reluctant to go to sleep due to the excitement. These circumstances meant that Sherlock and the others' absence went unnoticed. When they returned, they naturally blended in without a problem. However, the atmosphere was somewhat awkward among the four of them. It was fine when Snape, the external conflict, was present, but now that he had returned to the common room, the topic was no longer easy to discuss. Mainly because of Hermione and Ron. Sherlock had never known what embarrassment felt like. As for Harry, he was not at fault in the whole affair. Finally, Hermione broke the silence. She first looked at Sherlock and said, "Thank you." Then she smiled and nodded at Harry and Ron. Afterward, she fled to her plate as if escaping. Granger, wait! Ron reached out with his right arm, his hand open, wanting to stop Hermione. He sincerely wanted to apologize. Unfortunately, she had already run off. It's okay, I don't think she'll mind. Seeing this, Harry patted Ron on the shoulder and said. Ron looked at Hermione, who had already mingled with the girls, and could only sigh and lower his hand. You can teach people, but they won't learn. Experience teaches people, and once is enough. After that night, Hermione Granger became less concerned about breaking school rules. This made her much more likable, and her relationship with her classmates was no longer as stiff as before. She also became friends with Harry and Ron, who, after Sherlock, could call her by her first name. On the third day after Halloween, the day before the first Quidditch match of the season, Harry was suddenly called away from training by Professor McGonagall. Harry originally thought McGonagall was going to give him some pre-match encouragement. After all, if they could win this match against Slytherin, they would rise to second place in the House Cup Championship. However, as he walked, he felt that something was not right. Because Professor McGonagall didn't say a word, she led him to a separate small tower. Then, in one breath, she went up to the 8th floor and stopped in front of a gargoyle. When she said the password, the gargoyle nimbly jumped aside, and the wall behind it split in two. A spiral staircase hidden behind it, slowly moving upward, came into view. Harry neither knew nor dared to ask, so he remained silent and continued to follow Professor McGonagall all the way up to the top of the stairs. A gleaming oak door appeared in front of him, with a griffin-shaped brass knocker on it. Having come all this way, Harry was already a little dazed, not knowing what Professor McGonagall wanted to do. But as she pulled the knocker, Harry was stunned. What came into view was a spacious and beautiful circular room, with a huge table at one end, its legs in the shape of unique claws. On a shelf behind the table was a tattered, crumpled wizard's hat. Harry immediately recognized it as the sorting hat that had placed him in Gryffindor at the opening ceremony. Of course, the most striking thing here was the old man with the long beard in the room. The moment he saw him, Harry subconsciously ignored everything else. Albus Dumbledore. This was the headmaster's office. In that instant, several thoughts flashed through Harry's mind. The Quidditch match was very important, both for himself and for Gryffindor. But, it wasn't so important that Dumbledore would personally encourage him, was it? Or had he broken school rules again? Harry began to try to recall his recent behavior, but it didn't seem like he had violated any rules. Except for going to the underground classroom on Halloween Eve without permission. But wasn't that over? Just as Harry was still in a daze. Mr. Holmes, may we begin now? With Dumbledore's words, Harry realized something. He was too nervous and hadn't noticed that there were other people besides Dumbledore. Looking around, he noticed that in addition to Dumbledore, McGonagall, and himself, there were also Sherlock, Hermione, and Snape. Combining Dumbledore's words, Harry suddenly realized. Could it be, that his being here was Sherlock's idea? Dear Harry, just as you thought. When Harry subconsciously looked at Sherlock, the latter, as always, saw through his thoughts. To verify the reliability of my statement, I need your help. Before Harry could respond, Snape's cold voice rang out. Detective Sherlock Holmes, now that we have gathered them all according to your request, I hope you will not disappoint us. Sure enough, his being here was Sherlock's idea. And Hermione's too, but why? Before Harry could figure it out, Sherlock had already turned to Hermione. You may begin. Hermione nodded and began to recount the events from the last charms class on Halloween Eve. At that moment, Harry finally learned from Hermione's perspective what had happened that day. It was exactly as Sherlock had predicted. First, she couldn't stand Ron's teasing and hid in the girls' bathroom, crying for a long time. Second, she was rescued by Sherlock just before the troll arrived. Third, she and Sherlock discovered their and Ron's whereabouts. Finally, the four of them followed the troll and discovered the terrifying blood writing with an unclear meaning. Although some of it was Harry's personal experience, hearing it from Hermione's mouth gave it a sense of novelty. Just as Harry was listening with great interest, Sherlock suddenly spoke. It's your turn, Harry. Hey! Harry was stunned, then reacted. Sherlock wanted him to recount that day's events like Hermione had. Meeting Dumbledore's encouraging gaze, Harry steadied himself and slowly recounted his experience that day. In the process of recounting, he vaguely understood why Sherlock had asked him and Hermione to come. On Halloween, Sherlock, himself, and Hermione each had a period of experience where they acted alone without intersecting. As for why Ron wasn't called, it was naturally because he and Ron had been together from beginning to end. But why wasn't Quirrell here? With this question in mind, he finished recounting his experience, and Sherlock began his account. However, his first words startled everyone. First, Professor Quirrell let the troll into the underground classroom. Harry and Hermione opened their mouths in surprise. However, Harry, who unconditionally trusted Sherlock, quickly reacted. So that's it. That's why Quirrell wasn't here. McGonagall and Snape raised their eyebrows. As for Dumbledore, he turned to Harry and Hermione, his tone gentle, but his words left them speechless. Harry, Hermione, would you please leave first? Harry and Hermione subconsciously looked at Sherlock. When they saw Sherlock nod to them, they reluctantly walked out the door. Headmaster Dumbledore, it seems that in the hearts of Mr. Potter and Miss Granger, our great Detective Holmes is more trustworthy than you. Hearing Snape being sarcastic again, and especially emphasizing Headmaster and great Detective Holmes, Dumbledore smiled. Severus, this old man who is about to die is originally inferior to young people. Snape. Mr. Sherlock, you may continue. Chapter 53. In the headmaster's office, Sherlock calmly analyzed the case. Second, the line of blood was left by Professor Quirrell. Third, everything Professor Quirrell did was under someone else's orders. Silence, a lengthy silence. Evidence. Dumbledore spoke, his eyes full of curiosity, based solely on what happened that night. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sherlock said quickly in his usual calm tone. Even if he is underestimated, Quirrell is still the defense against the dark arts professor. Being frightened by a troll to that extent is already excessive, but to be able to run all the way from the underground classroom to the Great Hall, finish telling you what he wanted to say, and then faint, that performance is simply too clumsy. Dumbledore said with a smile, Minerva once told me that you have an amazing ability for analysis and deduction, and it seems that is indeed the case. That night, you made some inferences about the person who left the blood. Can you tell me how you knew these things? After that night, McGonagall specifically sought out Dumbledore to tell him about Sherlock's deductions. The person who left the blood was a middle-aged man less than 6 feet tall, right-handed, using a wand about 9 inches long, agile and cunning. Doing this was not his original intention but stemmed from someone else's instructions. Before the start of the term, McGonagall had already mentioned that Sherlock had deduced that Hogwarts was in the Scottish Highlands. Now with this happening again, Dumbledore was naturally very interested. Actually, deducing these things is very simple. A person's height can be judged from the length of their stride. The calculation method is also simple, but it is useless for me to explain it step by step now, so I will skip it for now. When a person is writing in a space that is not very large, they will habitually choose the middle position. Based on the traces left at the scene, with the center point of the room as the frame of reference, the line of words is slightly to the right. Combining these 2 points, you can deduce the other party's height and dominant hand. Since they were using a wand to write, you can also determine the length of the wand. These are as simple as child's play. Then how did you see that he was agile and cunning? Professor McGonagall couldn't help but ask. Compared to Dumbledore and Snape, she had personally witnessed Sherlock's abilities. Being able to deduce the location of Hogwarts in the English Highlands based solely on clues, with no knowledge of magic, was truly impressive. That's why she supported Sherlock in expressing his deductions that night. I arrived at the underground classroom the moment I saw Professor Quirrell, and even then, I barely managed to run into Hermione before the troll did, which shows that he is not slow. Professor Quirrell had 2 purposes for releasing the troll. The first was to create chaos, so that he would have the opportunity to approach the 4th floor corridor. Although I don't know what Mr. Dumbledore had Hagrid place on the 4th floor, that was clearly Professor Quirrell's target. Unfortunately, he failed. Dumbledore and McGonagall exchanged glances. You deduced this as well? Yes, Sherlock said, then looked at McGonagall. Speaking of which, we should all thank Professor Snape. Dumbledore smiled. McGonagall was slightly surprised. Snape was expressionless. While others were searching for the troll in the chaos, Professor Snape went directly to the 4th floor and stopped Professor Quirrell, for which he was bitten in the leg. Also, Professor Snape was clearly trying to protect me that night when he stopped me from continuing to state my analysis. Professor Snape must have thought that Professor Quirrell would feel that I had deduced that he was the one who did it after hearing my analysis. Holmes. Snape finally couldn't bear it anymore. He said with an indignant expression, "Don't talk about irrelevant things." Sherlock originally wanted to elaborate further on the matter of Snape being bitten, but seeing the other party's embarrassed and angry appearance, he could only shrug his shoulders and give up helplessly. Professor Quirrell's first goal was thwarted, so he had to settle for second best, and join the other professors in dealing with the troll. Of course, he didn't need to take action against the troll. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape's strength was enough to handle it. As for the line of blood, he had already prepared it when he released the troll. This can be verified from both the casting time and the traces left at the scene, so I won't say much more. When the professors returned after dealing with the troll, Professor Quirrell would lead everyone there to discover the trace of blood. By the way, Professor Quirrell's performance after seeing the blood trace was still too heavy-handed, which also confirmed my suspicion of him. So, what does Ratch represent? Is it the person who instructed Quirrell? A very bold guess. Sherlock shook his head. My friend Hermione also believed that the person who left the blood originally wanted to write a woman's name, Rachel, but was interrupted by other things, so they didn't finish writing it. But I don't think it's necessary to waste time looking for a Miss Rachel, because Ratch means revenge in German. According to my deduction, the person who instructed Professor Quirrell has serious racist tendencies, so they used German to write the word revenge. So. Sherlock paused, looking at Dumbledore. Sir, can you tell me what you have found out now? As soon as these words were spoken, even Snape, who had originally intended to mock, was stunned. He and McGonagall turned their gazes to Dumbledore at the same moment. Meeting the gazes of several people, Dumbledore was first taken aback, then smiled. Minerva's judgment is as excellent as ever, Mr. Sherlock, you are even better than she described. Albus. McGonagall looked at Dumbledore with some apprehension. It's okay, Dumbledore waved his hand, meeting Sherlock's gaze and said, I have indeed discovered something. Hearing Dumbledore say this, Sherlock immediately clasped his hands together to support his chin, staring at him with bright eyes. From the moment he learned that Dumbledore had summoned him, Sherlock already knew what would happen tonight. Picking out Quirrell was just the beginning. What really mattered was the person standing behind him. It's just that he didn't have all the information, so he needed someone like Dumbledore to further confirm it. However, Dumbledore suddenly turned to Snape. Severus, would you mind stepping out for a moment? Snape. In that case, I won't disturb your gathering. Snape said through gritted teeth, but... Dumbledore, you owe me an explanation. After saying these words, he walked out of the headmaster's office without looking back. Youth is good. Looking at Snape's back, Dumbledore couldn't help but sigh, then looked at McGonagall again. Albus, me too. McGonagall pointed to herself, looking incredulous. I'm sorry, Minerva. Dumbledore looked at Professor McGonagall, with a smile still on his face. Please trust me. McGonagall. Chapter 54. Snape, who had been invited out of the headmaster's office by Dumbledore, saw Harry and Hermione whispering as soon as he stepped out, and his face immediately changed. Why are you still here? Harry was startled and quickly explained, Professor, we just... However, before he could finish, Snape interrupted him without any politeness. Potter, I'm not your nanny. He completely ignored Hermione, who was standing to the side, and his gaze was like a sharp blade cutting into Harry. Why can't you bring your brain with you before you do things? Or, is that thing on your neck just for show? Snape's vicious words left Harry speechless, not knowing what to do. Besides your brain, are your ears not working either? What are you still doing here? Do I need to arrange a detention for you? Harry and Hermione's expressions changed immediately. Just then, Professor McGonagall, whose face was even more gloomy than Snape's, pushed open the door and came out. Professor Snape, Potter was brought here by me, and he is a Gryffindor student. Even if he needs to be dealt with, it should be by me. Seeing McGonagall also coming out of the headmaster's office, Snape was obviously stunned, but a hint of understanding immediately appeared in his eyes. Whether it was an illusion or not, Harry and Hermione both noticed the corners of Snape's mouth turning up slightly. All right. Professor McGonagall, but I don't think you should indulge him like this anymore. Severus, I am the head of house. This time, it was Snape who was interrupted. He looked at McGonagall in surprise, seemingly not expecting her to say that. McGonagall ignored him and left directly with Harry and Hermione. Harry and Hermione, who had originally wanted to stay and wait for Sherlock, fell silent and obediently followed. At this moment, they even felt that Professor McGonagall was more terrifying than Professor Snape. After the three of them disappeared from his sight, Snape turned his head and glanced at the headmaster's office again, a complex look appearing in his eyes, and then he drifted away. Headmaster's office. Sherlock clearly felt that Professor McGonagall seemed even angrier than Professor Snape about being invited out of the office by Dumbledore. He looked at Dumbledore. Did these words have to wait until it was just the two of us to be said? Yes, but not yet. As Dumbledore spoke, he reached out his wand and tapped the table, looking at the portraits hanging on the wall. Everyone, could you please excuse us for a moment? These portraits were of both men and women, and when Sherlock first arrived, they were all snoring softly in their respective frames. Now, with Dumbledore's words, the portraits on the wall began to grumble with dissatisfaction. Some of them were still dozing off, but eventually, under Dumbledore's gaze, they stopped pretending to be asleep and left the frames from the side, muttering curses. They are all former headmasters of Hogwarts. When all the frames were empty, Dumbledore spoke, a hint of reminiscence appearing in his eyes. Sherlock subconsciously asked, "Are you the same?" "What?" Dumbledore couldn't follow Sherlock's train of thought for a moment. "I mean, will you be hung here in the future too?" "Yes, but I hope that day doesn't come too soon." Sherlock understood upon hearing this. After a brief silence, Dumbledore spoke first, and he dropped a bombshell as soon as he opened his mouth. "I suspect that Quirrell has already started working for Voldemort." Sherlock wasn't surprised, so Voldemort really didn't die. "I have always suspected that he didn't die," Dumbledore said seriously, although many people believe that he left 11 years ago. For such a powerful dark wizard, resisting death is not a difficult thing. After saying this, he looked at Sherlock with some curiosity. You don't seem surprised. Rubeus Hagrid once said something similar to Harry. Sherlock said bluntly, some things that happened after coming to school further confirmed my guess. However, if that's the case, why not just kick Quirrell out of the castle? Judging from the descriptions in the literature, Voldemort's strength is beyond doubt. Even if he is in a weak period now, he should not be underestimated. But, since you know Quirrell has a problem, why not nip the danger in the bud? Quirrell, he is an excellent Ravenclaw, and as a headmaster, I cannot abandon my student even if he has already graduated. Dumbledore's voice was somewhat low. His changes have been great since the beginning of the school year, but I can also feel that he is constantly struggling. Don't you think so too? Is that why you asked everyone else to leave? Dumbledore's reason made Sherlock laugh. Quirrell is your student, doesn't mean the others aren't. Harry, me, first-year students, and all the older students in the castle, they are all your students. Just to save a fallen person, and possibly an unsavable fallen person, you're willing to use so many people as a bet? For someone who wrote the words revenge in blood, I don't think he deserves it. Sherlock's words were almost accusations. Dumbledore was not Snape after all, and he said in a gentle tone. Sherlock, I must admit, you are even more outstanding than Minerva said. Thank you, you already said that earlier. Even in the face of praise from the greatest white wizard of the century, Sherlock didn't think it was something to be proud of. You're not an idiot, so, what exactly gave you the courage to keep Quirrell in the school? I'm sorry, I have a guess, but there are some things I can't tell you yet. It's because of Harry, isn't it? What did you say? Sherlock's words stunned Dumbledore once again. You're pinning your hopes on Harry, aren't you? Sherlock said expressionlessly. Dumbledore looked at Sherlock without speaking. The other party's unusual sharpness suddenly reminded him of someone, a former friend. However, before he could start reminiscing, Sherlock started to unleash a torrent of words at an extremely fast pace. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Headmaster. People say that Voldemort's only fear is you. But you yourself just said that Voldemort is a dark wizard who can resist death. So I don't understand why you think Harry can fight the initiator of the Wizarding War? He's still a child. A first-year student who has just started learning magic. Or do you really think Harry Potter is the savior, and that he defeated Voldemort? If that's the case, maybe you can go to the Ugandan rainforest and play sumo wrestling with mountain gorillas. Under those fierce slaps, your brain might clear up a bit. Chapter 55. Sherlock was inherently somewhat sarcastic. However, since entering Hogwarts, everyone he had encountered had been very polite. Even Snape, who was constantly targeting Gryffindor, was, in Sherlock's eyes, a despicable but kind person, so this attribute of his had never been displayed. This time, when Dumbledore was about to use his friend, it finally erupted. In fact, Sherlock didn't object to being used. He often used Harry and Hermione. If Harry and Hermione were willing to use him, he wouldn't refuse either. But Dumbledore's behavior was clearly different from his own. Knowing that Quirrell was likely a pawn of Voldemort, he still allowed him to enter Hogwarts, placing Harry on the edge of life and death. The purpose of his words was also very clear. If Dumbledore couldn't explain himself clearly today, then he would never allow Dumbledore to act so arbitrarily. Faced with the angry Sherlock, Dumbledore was once again stunned. He lowered his head and fell into deep thought. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Saying that Voldemort is most afraid of me is really too flattering. He possesses abilities that I will never have. As for my guess, if anyone can completely kill Voldemort, that person will only be Harry." As soon as Dumbledore said these words, it was like a bolt of lightning flashing across the sky, dispelling all the doubts in Sherlock's mind. After being at school for 2 months, Sherlock had gradually become disenchanted with magic. In an instant, all the clues were connected. Only Harry can? The difference between him and others is, the only one who survived Voldemort's killing curse. Was it his parents who protected him as a baby, so your confidence is that scar? Or, a spell that still has protective effects to this day? This series of thoughts arose in an instant. As Sherlock blurted them out, the expression on Dumbledore's face became even more complicated. The familiar feeling from before became even stronger. Dumbledore's thoughts returned to that summer in Godric's Hollow. At this moment, he even felt that Sherlock was more perceptive than that old friend. Looks like my deduction is correct. Sherlock knew his guess had been confirmed once again just by looking at Dumbledore's expression. Yes, my child, you are absolutely right. Dumbledore looked at Sherlock and slowly said, I think you should know about the prophecy concerning the savior of the magical world. Hearing Dumbledore mention the prophecy of the savior, Sherlock blurted out without thinking. The one who can end the Dark Lord's reign will be born at the end of July in a wizarding family. Hermione had found this in the library. Although the source was hearsay, it should be accurate from the results. The content is correct, but it's not accurate. Dumbledore sighed. To be precise, the content of the prophecy is the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives. Sherlock immediately extracted the key information from Dumbledore's words. Mark him as equal. Indeed. Dumbledore smiled, you noticed that, as expected. Neville Longbottom's birthday is only one day earlier than Harry's, Sherlock said straightforwardly, so who the savior is actually determined by Voldemort himself. Yes, there were two children who fit the prophecy, but Voldemort ultimately chose Harry. Dumbledore said with a complex expression, on that day, Harry's mother, to protect him, used an ancient spell at the cost of her life. That spell possessed the greatest emotion in the world, love. Voldemort's killing curse rebounded on Harry, and he disappeared from then on. As for Harry, he became the only lucky one to survive the killing curse. That protective spell is still guarding Harry to this day. That's your confidence. Although he already knew the ins and outs of the matter, Sherlock was still not satisfied. I think you should know that in this world, things aren't necessarily more powerful just because they're old. Rest assured, this spell will fail sooner or later, but it's still too early. It should require the power of blood relatives to maintain it, right? Before Dumbledore could give a specific explanation, Sherlock said, that's why you insist on Harry living with the Dursleys after all, they are Harry's only relatives in this world. Dumbledore stared blankly at Sherlock. He was speechless. Sherlock's performance today had completely exceeded his imagination. Looking at Sherlock in front of him, at this moment, the white-haired old man couldn't help but have such a thought in his mind. Do you see it? Gellert, there is a genius here who can surpass you. Thinking about Harry, who survived Voldemort's killing curse, and McGonagall coming to him earlier to ask him to let Harry join the Quidditch team, his thoughts further diverged. And, there are two of them. Gellert. No matter how powerful Sherlock's reasoning ability was, he couldn't guess what Dumbledore was thinking without sufficient information. Seeing that the other party was somewhat absent-minded, Sherlock couldn't help but frown. Besides this reason, is the reason you are having Harry face Voldemort is because you have no way to completely kill him. Sherlock's words immediately pulled Dumbledore back from that distant summer. He gave Sherlock a deep look, and his expression also became serious. I now suspect that even if Voldemort is killed, he will be resurrected in other ways, and may even become more powerful. So not giving up on already graduated students is just one of the reasons. Sherlock pondered, the key is that you need Harry to face Voldemort himself to determine whether that spell is effective and to what extent it can play a role in dealing with Voldemort. Sherlock, as you said, the others are also my students, aren't they? Dumbledore finally smiled again, rest assured, Harry will be fine. The people protecting him are not just me. Like Professor Snape. Oh, I'm very glad that we have the same view on this point. No, I feel that Professor Snape is more pragmatic than you in this regard. If only Harry could think the same way as you. I think we can change the subject. Want a cockroach cluster? No, thank you. Okay. I'm glad Harry can have a friend like you. As for whether to tell Harry about Quirrell, it's up to you to decide, but I hope you don't tell him about our agreement. Very well, so what exactly did you put on the fourth floor? The Philosopher's Stone, it's the material for making the elixir of life. I think you should understand why Quirrell would be interested in it. So really don't want a cockroach cluster. Next topic. Chapter 56. You stayed in the headmaster's office for so long, just to discuss the inheritance Harry's parents left him. Sherlock met with Harry and Hermione again the next day. When they heard Sherlock talking about his discussion with Dumbledore, they were both stunned. Oh, right, and Ron too. He expressed strong dissatisfaction with Sherlock's actions yesterday. It would have been one thing if Sherlock had faced Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, and the other bigwigs alone. But you specifically included Harry and Hermione, so why did you leave him out? What does that mean? Was it on purpose? Sherlock really did do it on purpose. In his opinion, Ron's role in the whole incident was to make Hermione run to the girls' bathroom alone. After that, he accompanied Harry the entire time. So there was no need for him to retell what Harry had already said from a different perspective. In fact, if it weren't for this interlude, Sherlock's investigation into the troll incident would have been even easier. It was just adding difficulty for no reason. In that case, it was better not to call this partner. Of course, there are two sides to everything. This incident also taught Hermione a lesson, making her aware of her own problems. Now she gets along much better with her classmates than before. This can barely be considered Ron's contribution. Ignoring Ron's complaints, Sherlock turned to Harry. Harry, you might not believe it, but your parents really left you a lot of inheritance. Yes, I already saw it at Gringotts. Harry's emotions were inevitably low when his parents were mentioned. Sherlock seemed completely unaware of this and continued, no, that's just part of it. In fact, your parents left you many other things, and they're all at the Potter family's old house. Harry raised his head in surprise. The latter looked at him and said, word by word. In addition to that, the Potter family also owns a very effective hair growth potion. Because its effect is so good, even the staff in charge of promotion used there isn't a single bald person in the wizarding world as a core selling point, and widely advertised it. According to the agreement, you will receive a patent fee for every bottle of this hair growth potion sold on the market. It's just that these families haven't paid for 10 years. Although Dumbledore said he was willing to help, I personally suggest that you should handle debt collection yourself. Speaking of this, Sherlock's eyes sparkled, and his eyes flickered with excitement. Looking at Sherlock giving him advice with a serious face, Harry didn't know what to say for a moment. You say he's doing it for your own good, but bringing up this topic at this time is a bit inappropriate after all. You say he's stirring up trouble, but based on his understanding of Sherlock, he also knows that the other party is indeed sincerely doing it for his own good. That's why he's even more speechless. Speaking of which, I don't seem to have ever seen a bald wizard. So it turns out that this is all thanks to the Potter family. Ron couldn't help but interject. Sherlock nodded. Just as Ron said, he had long discovered that all wizards, regardless of gender or age, had a head of thick hair. Originally, he thought this was a benefit that wizards naturally had compared to muggles. But after listening to Dumbledore's introduction, he realized that the Potter family had made such outstanding contributions to the wizarding world. Sherlock was immediately filled with respect. You must know that baldness is a man's greatest enemy. But what if someone used Harry's family's hair growth potion and it didn't work? What would happen? Ron couldn't help but ask again. Normally it's unlikely, but if it really happens, then it's troublesome. Sherlock stared at Harry and said with a serious face. The other party will definitely think that the Potter family's hair growth potion is just a sham, and may even come to Harry to settle the score in a fit of anger. If he's narrow-minded, it's not impossible for him to take revenge on Harry for this kind of thing. Harry. Let's not talk about this for now. Sherlock and Ron were drifting further and further away from the topic, so Hermione quickly interrupted them and looked at Sherlock and asked. Did Professor Dumbledore kick us all out just to tell you this? Is the headmaster so idle? No, I brought it up myself. Harry. Sherlock said, then looked at Harry again. Dear Harry, this is what you deserve, don't feel embarrassed. Harry's expression was complicated. Thank you. Ron, you're actually pretty nice. Who asked you about that? Hermione finally couldn't help it, she lowered her voice and roared, what's going on with Quirrell? So that's what you wanted to know. What else? Hermione looked helpless. Who would care about hair growth potions? There's not enough evidence, so it can't be determined yet that Quirrell is Voldemort's minion. Hearing this name, Ron couldn't help but shudder. Not enough evidence. Hermione was a little excited. Sherlock, haven't you already made a deduction? You said it yourself, it's just a deduction. Sherlock said calmly, although I'm almost certain that the troll and the blood writing were Quirrell's doing, but without solid evidence, Dumbledore won't attack a professor. How could this be? Hermione's emotions were a little low. That's Voldemort. Knowing that such a dangerous person is coveting Harry, how can we just ignore it? Because she found the prophecy about Harry and Voldemort in the library, Hermione knew very well why Voldemort wanted to deal with Harry. Because of this, she was more aware of Harry's situation than Ron. It couldn't really be because someone used the hair growth potion and it didn't work, right? Dumbledore promised that he would protect Harry. Sherlock wasn't lying. He just didn't finish his sentence. Sherlock knew very well that without him, under Dumbledore's encouragement, or rather, instigation, even if Harry didn't know the truth, he would get a rush of blood to the head and rush forward, yelling. Perhaps under the protection of Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, and others, Harry could really turn bad luck into good. But Sherlock didn't think this was good. He felt that a person shouldn't be manipulated like a puppet in the name of "this is all for your own good." Struggles require strategy. That's why he strongly demanded that Dumbledore tell the truth. Even so, Sherlock still felt that he was hiding something from him. But it doesn't matter, he won't be able to hide it for long. Is there a possibility? Just then, Ron whispered, that Snape is actually the bad guy? I always feel that Professor Quirrell doesn't seem like the kind of person who would do such a thing. Hermione glanced at Ron, and rarely didn't refute. Indeed, compared to Professor Quirrell, Snape seemed more like a bad guy. You guys have too many misunderstandings about Professor Snape. Sherlock looked at Harry and gave a serious suggestion. Although he's annoying, he's the one who least wants anything to happen to you. On the contrary, if you feel like you are in danger, you can ask him for help at any time. Okay. Harry currently has unconditional trust in Sherlock. Seeing Harry like this, Ron couldn't say anything. He could tell that even if Sherlock said the sun was square now, Harry would believe it. Seeing this, he simply asked another question that he cared about. Since the blood writing was written in German, why don't you think the mastermind is a German? Chapter 57. This problem is actually very simple. You were there at the time. If you had paid a little attention, you would have noticed that the letter A was somewhat modeled after the German style. Real Germans often use Latin script. Conversely, the E at the end uses a cursive style, which is precisely a British writing habit. Perhaps it was superfluous, perhaps it was an attempt to cover up, or maybe that's just his level of skill. In any case, his imitation skills are not very good. Therefore, I can say with certainty that this letter was definitely not written by a German. Ron couldn't help but praise, I knew it. You're amazing. Harry noticed that Sherlock seemed very happy after hearing Ron's praise. In fact, he had noticed this a long time ago. As long as someone praises Sherlock's achievements in detective work, his friend becomes as sensitive as any girl hearing compliments about her beauty. Provided that the person's praise is sincere. Sure enough, after Sherlock finished his analysis of the blood writing, he actually took the initiative to say to Ron, I can tell you one more thing. What thing? You must find it strange why I keep insisting that Professor Snape is a despicable but kind-hearted person. Now, not to mention Ron, even Harry and Hermione became interested. Yeah, why is that? Yes, why is it? Because Professor Snape and Harry's father were rivals in love. The topic was so explosive that the three young wizards opened their mouths wide and couldn't close them for a long time. Harry, Professor Snape's love for your mother was sincere and pure. Sherlock looked at the shocked Harry and said calmly, after your mother passed away, that love was transferred to you. Silence. A long silence. After a while, Hermione was the first to recover from the shock. She took a deep breath and asked curiously, did Dumbledore say this too? Even if Dumbledore said this, it's too outrageous. It's too obvious. Sherlock shook his head, it doesn't even require special observation. Hearing Sherlock say this, Hermione suddenly thought of the scene in the first potions class. Are you saying, the Victorian language of flowers? Although Snape interrupted halfway through, Hermione remembered Snape and Sherlock's conversation clearly. The daffodil is a type of lily, which is Lily, exactly Harry's mother's name, and its flower language is my regret follows you to the grave. Wormwood represents absence and bitter sorrow. Draught of living death represents a hellish and miserable life. Snape's question at the time was what do you get when you add powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Sherlock had already given the answer powdered root of asphodel added to an infusion of wormwood can be used to prepare a draught of living death, which is exactly a draught of living death. So as long as Snape's question and answer are translated according to Sherlock's explanation, it is Lily falls into bitter sorrow, I deeply regret your mother's death, and from then on, I live a hellish and miserable life. Once she understood this, Hermione's eyes widened even more. Dear Hermione, I'm glad you still remember this. Sherlock said with a smile, that's why I said that this matter doesn't require special observation at all. Because Professor Snape expressed his strongest feelings to Lily's son in the first class. In addition to his usual performance in potions class, it was enough for Sherlock to make a deduction. For the rest of the day, Harry and his friends were immersed in the shock brought by this news. This topic was really too explosive. In the evening, Sherlock called Harry out and handed him a box. "What is this?" Harry hadn't recovered from the shock and was curious about Sherlock calling him out alone. Now that he saw Sherlock handing him this, he couldn't help but guess. Could there be Professor Snape's secret in this box? "This is a gift your father left for you." Okay, he was indeed thinking too much with Snape on his mind. But upon hearing that it was his father's relic, Harry's expression instantly changed. As if holding a priceless treasure, he opened the box, and his eyes couldn't help but pause slightly. A strange object between solid and liquid quietly stayed in the center of the box, its silver-gray color shining brightly. Harry carefully reached out, and then surprisingly found that this glittering silver object was actually a fabric, and the feel was extremely strange, as if it was woven with water. "This is an invisibility cloak. Dumbledore asked me to tell you to use it with caution," Sherlock said with a smile, although he didn't say it out loud. I could see that he was hesitating. "I think he was worried that you would use it to do something bad." Harry didn't seem to hear Sherlock's words, and still gently stroked the invisibility cloak left by his father with his hand. After a long while, he raised his head to look at Sherlock. "Why? What why?" Sherlock noticed that Harry's eyes were red, and couldn't help but feel a little strange. "What happened to Harry? Why give it to me? I mean..." Harry suppressed his excited mood and said in a low voice, "If it weren't for you, Professor Dumbledore would definitely not have given it to me." Hearing Harry say this, Sherlock couldn't help but smile. "Dear friend, I'm glad you trust me so much. But I still have to say, Dumbledore originally planned to give it to you as a Christmas gift. When we discussed the inheritance your parents left you, it was mentioned, and I suggested that he give you this gift now. Fortunately, he adopted my suggestion. But I think you'd better use it after the Quidditch match. I also plan to." Sherlock. Before Sherlock could finish speaking, Harry suddenly stretched out his arms and gave him a hug. "Harry." Sherlock looked at the suddenly enthusiastic Harry with a puzzled expression, not understanding what he was doing. Harry let go of him and said sincerely, "Sherlock, you are really amazing. I don't know how to express it, but, thank you. For me, the luckiest thing about coming to school is meeting you." Sherlock smiled. "I am honored to receive such a high valuation from the Savior." Hearing Sherlock say this, Harry seemed very embarrassed. "Not some savior, you are much better than me, I am just lucky." "Luck has always been part of strength," Sherlock said seriously. "Next, many things you need to do require luck. I listen to you." Sherlock smiled again. Simple 4 words, but they represent full trust. "By the way, what did you say you were going to do after the Quidditch match?" Harry asked curiously. Sherlock showed a smile for the 3rd time. "Take you leveling up." Chapter 58. After Scotland entered November, the weather became increasingly cold. This was especially true for Hogwarts, located in the Highlands. The mountains surrounding the castle were covered in white snow, which did not melt for 10 consecutive days. The surface of the Black Lake had frozen over early, and many young wizards were playing on the ice. Although the first Saturday was a sunny day, the temperature remained low. That morning, everyone in the Great Hall was excitedly discussing the first Quidditch match of the season, which was about to begin. Gryffindor vs Slytherin. People frequently cast glances at Harry. This was because news had spread that first-year student Harry Potter had exceptionally joined the Gryffindor team as a seeker. Gryffindor team captain Wood was furious. His original plan was to use Harry as a secret weapon, catching the opposing team off guard on the day of the match. To this end, he had put a lot of effort into keeping it a secret. He never expected the news to leak out. Just as Sherlock had predicted. But now, there was no point in investigating who had leaked the information. Wood could only rage ineffectually. Almost everyone was full of interest in Harry's debut on the field. Some said Harry would play great, arguing that the savior of the magical world couldn't be bad at Quidditch, otherwise, he wouldn't have exceptionally joined the team and become an official player. It couldn't be that he got into the team through connections, right? But others said he would perform terribly. Especially this morning. Rumors were circulating among the students that someone would need to run along the ground with a mattress during the match to prevent him from falling. It's probably Malfoy and his gang. He's been jealous that you can participate in a formal match as a first year, Hermione guessed. Obviously, Sherlock said calmly, it's meaningless except for venting emotions, but the imagination is commendable. Harry, you should eat some breakfast quickly. Ron said, stuffing sausages into his mouth. Harry shook his head, I don't want to eat anything. How about some toast? Hermione coaxed. I'm not hungry. Harry continued to shake his head. He felt terrible now. In another hour, he would be heading to the field, and he was so nervous that he had already gone to the bathroom several times. However, it didn't improve his terrible and nervous mood. Eat something, Sherlock looked at Harry, you need to maintain your strength. The Seeker is the opponent's key target. Harry was stunned, then nodded and took the toast from Neville next to him. Hermione, Ron. So you only listened to him? At 11 o'clock, almost all the teachers and students of the school came to the stands around the Quidditch field. Although the seats had been raised into the air, it was still difficult to see the game clearly sometimes, so many students brought telescopes. Sherlock took Hermione and Ron to the highest row. Speaking of which, they had to thank Wood for getting this prime spot. Until now, Wood still hadn't given up on getting Sherlock to join the team. To this end, he even gave special treatment Sherlock could watch them train. In the process, Sherlock became familiar with the people on the team, and getting a VIP seat was easy. Little round-faced Neville, little darky Dean, and Blaster Seamus came over without saying a word when they saw this. As Sherlock's roommates, Neville and Dean also brought the bed sheet that had been soiled by Ron's pet rat, Scabbers. The three of them worked together to draw a huge banner that read Potter will win. Dean was good at drawing and also drew a large Gryffindor lion below. It can be said that he was quite attentive. Seeing the huge banner brought by the three, Hermione thought for a while and simply added a magic spell to it. As a result, the paint began to flicker with colorful light, becoming more conspicuous. Where's Sherlock? Seamus looked around while marveling at Hermione's excellent magical attainments. As everyone knows, Sherlock is Harry's best friend, and he should be there in this situation. He has something to do with Harry, and he just left. Ron said with a chicken leg in his mouth, without raising his head. Ah, what's so important? Dean couldn't help but be surprised. The game was about to begin. At this moment, Harry in the locker room had already changed into the bright red Quidditch robes with the other team members. Sherlock pulled Harry aside and said to him. Harry, don't be afraid of what I'm about to say. Harry. Now that you've said that, how can I not be afraid? He swallowed quietly, and then heard Sherlock ask, how is your broom? Are you talking about the Nimbus 2000? Although he didn't understand why Sherlock suddenly asked this, Harry honestly replied. It's very good. I only need to touch it lightly, and it will turn in the direction I need. Very good. If my guess is correct, it may have some problems in the next game. What's the problem? Harry suddenly became nervous. Don't worry, my friend, it's not a big problem. Sherlock patted Harry on the shoulder, someone will cast a spell on your broom, throwing you off it while you're playing. Harry. Do you want to hear what you're saying? Someone wants my life, and you're saying it's not a big problem? I just saw that Professor Snape is on the scene, and he will protect you. Harry. Why do I feel even more scared? Also, I will stop the other party as soon as possible. Hearing Sherlock say this, Harry felt a little relieved. He lowered his voice, is it Quirrell? It's not certain yet, but as long as he takes action this time, it will be close to certain. Actually, I originally suggested that Dumbledore come to watch the game. With him on the scene, you would be absolutely safe. But in that case, the person who wants to do something knows that he can't do anything, so he won't take action. Speaking of this, Sherlock suddenly paused. He hesitated for a moment, but still threw out a question. This matter is very dangerous even so, are you still willing to continue the game? Harry suddenly raised his head. He found that although Sherlock's expression looked as indifferent as usual, a hint of worry flashed in his eyes. More importantly, he felt concern from the other party's seemingly unintentional tone. Harry suddenly understood that Sherlock was worried. Worried about himself taking on the responsibility of luring the snake out of its hole. He's still talking about Professor Snape, but he himself has such a reluctant side. Thinking of this, Harry suddenly wanted to joke with Sherlock, "If I say no, then I'll compete for you," Sherlock said immediately. Harry. "Thank you, Sherlock." Harry's eyes were a little moist. He looked at Sherlock and said softly, "Since you and Dumbledore both need me, let me do it." "Hey, Potter, Holmes, aren't you ready yet? Captain is about to start talking. He won't be in the mood without a listener." "Ouch, why did you hit me?" The Weasley twins had just opened their mouths when Wood interrupted them with a slap. Chapter 59. Hearing the Weasley twins half-joking urging, Harry turned back and shouted, "Just a moment, almost ready." Sherlock heard something in Harry's voice and said to him with a smile, "My dear friend, I can sense that you're nervous right now, try to relax a little." Noticing that Harry still didn't relax, he patted Harry on the shoulder again. "Believe in yourself, you naturally have a talent for this. Remember to be energetic on the field, don't lose points. Also, once you get out of trouble, end the game as soon as possible." After Sherlock finished speaking, he greeted the others and left the locker room. What needed to be said had been said, the rest was up to Harry himself. When Harry returned to the Gryffindor team, Fred Weasley asked curiously, "What exactly did he say to you?" "Only Sherlock, if it were anyone else, wouldn't be allowed into the locker room before the game." Therefore, everyone was very curious about Sherlock's special visit to Harry. "Sherlock came specifically to encourage me," Harry said, puffing out his chest. "He reminded me to be energetic in the game and not to lose points." Harry naturally knew that he couldn't tell others about Quirrell's matter. "Good job!" Wood loudly affirmed Sherlock's words. "Holmes is right, we all need to be energetic and be careful not to lose points." After saying this, he didn't forget to remind Harry, "Potter, you need to work harder and get your friend on the team soon." Harry was stunned for a moment, then nodded, "I'll try my best." At this time, Wood cleared his throat and turned to the others, "Lads and lasses." Chaser Angelina Johnson spoke, aggressively asserting her presence, indicating that there was more than just lads here. "Yes, and lasses," Wood agreed, "the time has come. Weasley, this important moment. George, the moment we've all been waiting for." "We've memorized Oliver's speech," Fred said to Harry, "we were on the team last year." "You two shut up!" Wood said angrily. He made a gesture to hit them, but the two, having learned their lesson, nimbly dodged to the side. With the Weasley twins interjecting and joking, the originally tense atmosphere dissipated a lot. But when Harry followed the others out of the locker room and walked towards the cheering stadium, he suddenly felt his knees weaken again. Even when Madame Hooch, who was serving as the referee, announced the game rules to both teams, it was still the same. Until a high-flying banner came into view. The words "Potter for the win" shone above the crowd. When he saw it, Harry immediately knew that his friends were there. In an instant, he shuddered, and suddenly felt full of courage. His back didn't ache, his legs weren't weak, and he had energy to walk. "Hey, it's that magical!" As Madame Hooch blew her silver whistle hard, Harry mounted his Nimbus 2000. "Be energetic, don't lose points." Using Sherlock's words to cheer himself up, Harry and the others took off and soared high into the sky. The game officially began. At this time, Sherlock had already returned to the stands. "What did you say to Harry?" The game had just begun, and the golden snitch, which was key to determining the outcome, had not yet appeared, so both seekers seemed idle for the time being. Hermione seized the time to ask Sherlock. Reminded him to pay attention to unexpected events that might occur during the game, Sherlock said, taking out his binoculars and starting to look out at the crowd. "What did you say?" Sherlock said it casually, but Hermione and Ron were startled, and the two immediately leaned over. "Is Harry in danger?" "Nothing serious." "Ha, found it." Sherlock put down his binoculars and looked at the two little friends. Obviously, hearing that someone wanted to harm Harry, both of them looked worried, and Ron even felt that the chicken leg in his hand was no longer fragrant. "Are you willing to help?" "Of course. Definitely. Look over there." Hermione took the binoculars and looked in the direction Sherlock pointed. "Professor Snape." "A little more to the right." "To the right? Do you mean Professor Quirrell?" "Yes, what you need to do is very simple." Sherlock looked at Hermione and said in a very fast voice, "Stay nearby to observe in advance, and once I give the signal, find a way to disrupt Quirrell's spell casting. Be careful, try not to let him notice your intention." Hermione and Ron gasped when they heard this. Sherlock, do you mean Quirrell will harm Harry during the game? If my guess is correct, this game is a rare opportunity for him. Oh my god! Ron's face was pale, and Hermione reached out to cover her mouth in surprise. She looked at Quirrell, then at Harry, and finally nodded heavily, I'll go right away. When Hermione left, Ron quickly pointed at himself and asked, What about me, what about me? You keep an eye on Professor Snape. Ron was stunned, unable to react for a moment. Didn't you say Snape was a good guy? A despicable but kind good guy. Sherlock corrected Ron's statement, then said, I need to verify a guess, no need to go over there, just pay attention to his movements here. No problem. Ron nodded heavily in agreement. He just liked it like this, with Sherlock using his brain and him taking action. Soon, Hagrid also arrived at the stadium. His size was too big, even though Hermione had left, Ron still squeezed with Neville to make room for him. I was in the hut just now, but how should I put it? Watching the game is different from being in the crowd. Oh, where's that muggle little girl? I asked her to do something. Hearing Sherlock's explanation, Hagrid didn't ask any more questions and focused his attention on the game. At this time, the game situation had changed. Gryffindor chaser Angelina Johnson grabbed the quaffle at the start, and after being intercepted and re-intercepted, she scored first, taking the lead. A burst of cheers erupted from the stands. Slytherin immediately showed their strong strength, quickly retaliating, and the score was tied at 10-10. At this moment, a passionate voice suddenly sounded, Wait a minute, is that the snitch? The commentator for this game is Lee Jordan, a friend of the Weasley twins. He was also the person Sherlock observed at platform 9 3/4 while waiting for Harry. At that time, Sherlock's judgment of him was senior, expressive, outgoing, strong expressive ability, usually serves as a host. Lee Jordan's commentary is very fast and rhythmic, like rapping. Under his reminder, everyone noticed the golden light. A small ball flapped its wings and darted through the air. It is the Golden Snitch. Chapter 60. In a Quidditch match, the team that catches the Golden Snitch gets an additional 150 points. At the same time, the game ends immediately. This means that as long as the score difference between the two sides has not exceeded 150 points, the team that catches the snitch will win. So, the moment the Golden Snitch appeared, Harry and the Slytherin Seeker naturally rushed towards it without hesitation. The two launched almost simultaneously, initially neck and neck. But as the youngest Seeker in a century, Harry was by no means a mere figurehead. Despite starting at the same time, he quickly gained a full body length advantage over his opponent thanks to his special flying posture and equipment. Anyone with a bit of insight could see that, barring any accidents, Harry would definitely catch the Golden Snitch. Snape, witnessing this scene, seemed to be reminded of something, and a clear look of disgust appeared in his eyes. Not far to his right, Quirrell, staring at Harry, suddenly narrowed his eyes. Hermione, who had been hiding nearby, quickly tightened her grip on her wand upon seeing this. Is he finally going to make a move? Just as Harry was about to catch the snitch, an unexpected event occurred. With a loud bang, Marcus Flint, the captain of Slytherin, flew in from the side and crashed straight into Harry. Hit by the strong impact, Harry's Nimbus 2000 violently veered off course. Fortunately, because he had been reminded by Sherlock beforehand, Harry had been fully prepared. Faced with this sudden change, he immediately grabbed the broom tightly. A loud boo immediately erupted throughout the stadium. Madame Hooch immediately blew her whistle to stop the game. She flew angrily to Flint and strongly condemned his actions. She then awarded Gryffindor a free shot in front of the goalposts. Flint did it on purpose. Ron shouted angrily. Dean even yelled loudly, malicious foul, send him off, referee. Give him a red card. You can't send people off in Quidditch. Ron felt a little regretful hearing what Dean said, also, what's a red card? Hagrid expressed his agreement with Thomas at this moment, they should change the rules of the game. Flint almost knocked Harry off his broom in the air. He will pay the price. Sherlock said calmly, looking at the tall Flint. Ron, Hagrid, Dean, and others suddenly felt as if the surrounding temperature had dropped several degrees. As Angelina Johnson scored the free shot, the score became 20-10, and Gryffindor took the lead again, and the interrupted game resumed. But with this interruption, the Golden Snitch disappeared from everyone's sight. This inevitably made people feel a little regretful. Harry, on the other hand, breathed a sigh of relief. Because of Sherlock's reminder, he had been tense from beginning to end. He even thought that Flint's barbaric collision was also done by Quirrell. But now it seemed that it was just the other party's personal behavior. It could only be said that this was a player with no sportsmanship and a corrupt moral character. This made Harry even begin to suspect whether the other party had Korean blood. After strongly condemning his opponent in his heart, Harry, who was wandering in the high sky again, felt a little bored and couldn't help but have such a thought. Could it be that Sherlock made a mistake? Even if Quirrell really wanted to harm me, he wouldn't be crazy enough to do it in front of all the teachers and students. However, as soon as this thought arose, his flying broom suddenly shook frighteningly. Shit! Harry cursed angrily. He quickly abandoned his mentality and immediately used all four limbs, grabbing the broom tightly with both hands while clamping it tightly with his knees. Just 1 second later, he knew how wise he was to do so. The Nimbus 2000, which had been as easy to control as an arm, completely ignored his commands and began to shuttle quickly in the air. Not only that, but it was also accompanied by violent swings from side to side. Obviously, the flying broom intended to throw Harry, its owner, from the air in the process of continuously spiraling upwards. Sherlock was naturally the first to notice Harry's abnormality. He quickly turned his telescope to Quirrell. Sure enough, Quirrell in the lens was staring at Harry intently. The strange thing was that the other party didn't open his mouth as he had imagined. Sherlock immediately reacted. Good, it's a silent spell. He turned the lens to Snape again. This one didn't stare at Harry like Quirrell, he probably hadn't noticed the clue yet. The main reason was that Slytherin had just thrown the quaffle into Gryffindor's goal, leveling the score again, attracting the attention of most people, including Snape. But Snape was Snape after all, he quickly discovered the problem and began to respond immediately. At this time, only a few people noticed that the Nimbus 2000 was twitching and twisting crazily as if it had gone mad, taking Harry higher and higher, away from the field. Ron, who had been told by Sherlock, immediately became anxious. Sherlock, I really don't know what Harry wants to do. Hagrid hadn't realized the seriousness of the problem and muttered, if I didn't know him so well, I would have thought he couldn't control his broom. You're right, Sherlock said with a cold look, handing the telescope in his hand to Ron, keep an eye on him. The he referred to was naturally Snape. Ron grabbed the telescope and saw Snape standing in the middle of the stands opposite them, staring at Harry, muttering non-stop. What is he doing? Is he making trouble? On the contrary, he is protecting Harry. After saying this, Sherlock raised his wand. A purple firework burst from the top of his wand. Now that he had gotten the answer he wanted, it was time to act. At this time, even the most dull people realized that something was wrong. Lee Jordan said extremely quickly, "What's wrong with Potter? His flying broom seems to have a problem. Oh my god, he can't control himself." Madame Hooch was also a little hesitating whether she should stop the game. At this moment, Marcus Flint once again showed his lack of sportsmanship, taking the opportunity to catch the quaffle and score 3 times in a row. However, the Gryffindor players were all focused on Harry, and no one paid attention to him. A group of people surrounded Harry, trying to take him to a safe area first. However, before they could get close, the flying broom rose again, throwing them far behind. On the other side of the stands, Hermione, who was ambushing near Quirrell, saw Harry's situation and was very anxious. Like Sherlock, she also guessed that Quirrell was casting a silent spell. But thinking of Sherlock's previous instructions, she stubbornly endured and did not interfere. Anxious, she kept moving her eyes back and forth between Harry, Quirrell, and the direction of Sherlock under the banner. Several times she couldn't help but want to take action, but in the end, she chose to trust Sherlock. She crossed her fingers on her knees, silently praying for Harry's safety. Finally, a purple firework rose from the direction of the banner. Hermione immediately realized that it was Sherlock's signal to herself. Without saying a word, she took out her wand and whispered the spell she had prepared. Soon, bright blue flames sprang out from the wand and went straight for the hem of Quirrell's robe. Chapter 61. Hagrid was immediately shocked when Sherlock said that Quirrell was the one who wanted to harm Harry. No. I mean, why do you always like to suspect the professors at Hogwarts? First it was Snape, and now it's Quirrell. That's just impossible. Before Hagrid could finish speaking, Sherlock interrupted him directly, it is Professor Quirrell. He was the one who released the troll on Halloween. Hagrid. By the way, That night he originally went to check the device protecting the Philosopher's Stone, but Professor Snape stopped him. On the other hand, Professor Snape, who was suspected by Ron, almost had his leg bitten off by your big dog, Hagrid. This time, it wasn't just Hagrid who widened his eyes. The 4 people present opened their eyes wide at the same time. What stone did you say? Snape stopped Quirrell. Galloping Gorgons. How do you know about Fluffy? Sherlock, how much are you hiding from us? Facing the 4 pairs of questioning eyes, Sherlock sighed deeply. Seeing this situation, he understood that the topic couldn't continue without explaining things clearly. The Philosopher's Stone is a substance with special functions, and it is also the main ingredient of the elixir of life. Sherlock said, turning to Harry, my friend, if you still have an impression of the wizard cards and the chocolate frogs, you should remember the introduction of Dumbledore. Sorry, I don't remember. Harry said shamefully. Sherlock shrugged. Dumbledore's well-known contributions include, defeating the Dark Wizard Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses for dragon blood, and achieving fruitful results in alchemy with his partner Nicholas Flamel. In the 4 people's dazed gazes, Sherlock directly recited this passage. Sherlock, how do you remember these? Harry said, expressing incomprehension. That's right, he had indeed read the wizard cards at the beginning, and the content about Dumbledore had also left a deep impression on him. But after more than 2 months, it was impossible for him to completely repeat the content above. I remember telling you before that the human brain is like a hard drive. As long as you choose to throw away useless things, you can naturally remember the information you need. You can do the same. Faced with Sherlock's matter-of-course statement, the 4 looked at each other, not knowing what to say for a moment. That kind of thing, I'm afraid only you can do it, right? The fruitful results in alchemy with Nicholas Flamel refer to the Philosopher's Stone. Sherlock said, turning to Hagrid again, and asked unexpectedly, Fluffy is your dog, right? Hagrid, still in shock, subconsciously replied, that's right, Fluffy is very loyal. I bought it from a guy I met at a hotel last year. That guy seems to be called Baskerville. Later I lent it to Dumbledore to guard the Philosopher's Stone. The word stopped abruptly here. Did you deduce this too? Hagrid couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up abruptly, his eyes widened like copper bells, and his voice began to tremble faintly. This first-year wizard is too scary. Half is deduction, and the other half is what Dumbledore said. Sherlock was very satisfied with Hagrid's honesty, put his hands together to support his chin, and looked at him with bright eyes. The Hound of the Baskervilles? Sounds interesting. Hearing that Dumbledore had told Sherlock the information, Hagrid breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness, if all this news was deduced by Sherlock, then he would be too exaggerated. But then again, a first-year student being able to do what he's doing now is already amazing. And also, why does Dumbledore tell Sherlock everything? After briefly explaining to Hagrid and his 3 friends, Sherlock made a summary statement. From Snape and Quirrell's actions today, 3 things can be confirmed. First, Quirrell is indeed Voldemort's minion. Hearing this name, Hagrid and Ron gasped at the same time, their bodies trembling. Harry and Hermione were naturally unmoved, and Sherlock was also expressionless. Second, Quirrell, or rather Voldemort, wants to obtain the Philosopher's Stone. By the way, Hagrid, he was the one who broke into Gringotts. Ah! Hagrid widened his eyes again, and before he could react, Sherlock explained. Harry told me that you met at the Leaky Cauldron. Before Hagrid could figure out the connection, he heard Sherlock continue. Third, Professor Snape is not Professor Quirrell's opponent. Why do you say that? This time it was Hermione who asked the question. Professor Snape is a potions master, but Quirrell looks timid and shrinking. Don't be misled by appearances, Hermione. Quirrell's strength is much stronger than his appearance. Even with Snape already starting to break the curse, Quirrell could still control the flying broomstick with a silent spell. It wasn't until you interfered with his spell casting that Professor Snape gained the upper hand. Of course, destruction is always easier than protection. After Sherlock said this, everyone in the cabin fell silent. It had been more than 2 months since the start of school, and even Harry and Hermione, who grew up in the Muggle world, had a clear understanding of Voldemort's power. Now hearing that even a Hogwarts professor had become his minion, it was naturally difficult to accept for a while. Sherlock, you said that Professor Dumbledore already knows about this, right? Hermione suddenly asked. Yes. Seeing that Sherlock gave an affirmative answer, the latter suddenly smiled. Then it doesn't matter, even during the Wizarding War, Hogwarts was the only safe place. Everyone says that Professor Dumbledore is the only person Voldemort fears. Hearing Hermione's words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. That's right, as long as there is Headmaster Dumbledore at Hogwarts, Quirrell wouldn't dare to act presumptuously. As for what happened today, wasn't it something Sherlock had discussed with Dumbledore in advance? Now that he has surfaced, there is nothing to worry about. After figuring this out, Hagrid's cabin was suddenly filled with a cheerful atmosphere. With the end of the Quidditch match, Harry's fame greatly increased. The savior of the magic world now had a new title, Quidditch Genius. Of course, neither the troll in the basement on Halloween nor the flying broomstick in the Quidditch match, the things related to Quirrell, were still not spread out. This led to Sherlock's reputation also increasing a lot, in addition to Harry's. Because the version circulating among teachers and students was that Sherlock deduced that Hermione was in the girls' bathroom through Professor Quirrell's actions on Halloween. Not only that, but he also acted at the first moment, rescuing Hermione from the troll. This brave behavior naturally received the support of the Gryffindor Little Lions. In addition, his reasoning ability also attracted the attention of the Ravenclaw Little Eagles. After the wizard dueling event at the beginning, some students had already begun to consult Sherlock. However, most of them were some students from his own academy, and the questions asked were relatively simple. But after this incident, other students from other academies gradually appeared among the people who came to Sherlock. Chapter 62. After the history of magic class on a certain Monday morning, Sherlock saw off several senior Ravenclaw students who had come to find him. When he returned to the classroom, he was greeted by his friends' surprised looks. "They are all my customers." Before they could ask, Sherlock took the initiative to explain. "Customers?" The others exchanged glances. Referring to classmates as customers seemed a bit too strange, didn't it? Ever since the Halloween incident spread, people started coming to me. Speaking of which, I have to thank Mr. Neville Longbottom for this. The first few customers found me through his introduction. Neville. The others turned to look at Neville. The latter was stroking the toad he had just found, and when he heard Sherlock's praise, he lowered his head shyly. After I successfully helped them, more and more people came to ask for my help. Actually, these troublesome things for them just need someone to guide them. I carefully listen to the facts of their experiences, and they listen to my advice. When the problem is solved, the fees go into my pocket. After Sherlock said this, the group of friends understood why Sherlock would call these classmates customers. Although they found it a bit unbelievable, when they thought of Sherlock's abilities, they immediately felt that it was understandable. "If only I could be as smart as Holmes," Seamus said with envy. "Even Ravenclaw students are coming to you, it's amazing." As everyone knows, Ravenclaw represents wisdom. When the Ravenclaw students came to consult Sherlock, it naturally meant that his wisdom had been recognized by that proud group of people. Even Hermione Granger, who was already known as Miss Know-It-All, didn't have such treatment. Since today's history of magic class ended relatively early, everyone wasn't in a hurry to eat, so they simply chatted for a few more minutes. "Speaking of which, I just found out that Mercury died yesterday," Dean said with a sad look. "Who?" The others looked at each other in confusion. "Freddie Mercury. Haven't you guys heard of him?" Seamus couldn't help but explain when he saw that his friend's topic hadn't resonated with anyone. "Freddie Mercury? Is he some famous wizard?" Neville asked weakly. "I haven't heard of the Mercury family," Hermione pondered for a moment, then looked at Ron. "What about you?" Ron spread his hands. "Me neither." Freddie Mercury, an Asian British male singer, the lead singer of Queen. Sherlock surprised everyone present with one statement. Seamus looked at him in disbelief. "Holmes, you actually know Mercury?" In his opinion, apart from the Weasley and Longbottom students who came from wizarding families, both Potter and Granger should know more about Mercury than Holmes. But the fact was that only Holmes knew him. Not to mention Sherlock's three friends. They knew Sherlock too well. This was someone who didn't even know that the Earth revolved around the sun. How could such a person know a band and its lead singer? "Queen, are they famous?" Neville raised his hand and asked weakly again. Famous is an understatement. As soon as he started talking about music, Dean immediately changed from his sleepy appearance in class and began to talk endlessly. Queen was formed in London in 1971 and immediately released their debut self-titled album, Queen. The release of A Night at the Opera in 1975 brought the band commercial success, with Bohemian Rhapsody winning the Best British Single at the first Brit Awards. The album News of the World in 1977 had a huge impact, especially the singles We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, which have been widely used in sports events since the 80s. The compilation album Greatest Hits, released in 1981, sold over 6 million copies and became the best-selling album in the UK. Just last year, they also received the Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music. Looking at Dean, who was excitedly popularizing science for everyone, the friends all showed surprised expressions. Was this the little darky they were familiar with? It felt like he had changed into a different person. Only Seamus was not surprised by Dean's performance, and continued his friend's train of thought. Queen combines glam rock, progressive rock, classical music, and heavy metal into one, influencing almost all heavy metal bands in the late 20th century. Speaking of this, he suddenly paused, and said with a look of realization, "I understand why Holmes knows Mercury. Listening to Dean, your violin playing is very good." As soon as he said this, Harry, Ron, and Neville, who were in the same dormitory as Sherlock, immediately reacted. That's right, since Sherlock's violin playing was so good, it wouldn't be surprising that he knew such a famous band. What? You can also play the violin? Only Hermione looked surprised. It was the first time she had heard of this. It's said that he died of pneumonia caused by AIDS, at the young age of 45. It's such a pity. Yes, his super-wide vocal range spanning 4 octaves and his high-pitched and brilliant timbre were simply too wonderful. Ron and Neville looked at each other. The Muggle world's bands were truly a blind spot in their knowledge. Harry and Hermione weren't much better. However, when Seamus and Dean sang We Will Rock You, the two of them discovered that they had both heard the song before. For Sherlock, although Queen didn't have a member who specialized in playing the violin, as Seamus said, many of their works incorporated classical music elements. This was why he, who was skilled at playing the violin, also knew Queen. Next, several people suggested returning to the dormitory and simply asking Sherlock to play a piece. Just then, there was a sudden knock at the door. The others looked up and saw a little witch walking in. She had 2 golden braids and a slightly red face. "Hannah, what are you doing here?" When Hermione saw her, she immediately asked in surprise. This little girl was Hannah Abbott from Hufflepuff. Because she was the first to put on the sorting hat during the sorting ceremony, Hermione had a deep impression of her. "Granger, you're here too, that's great." Hannah seemed happy to see Hermione, and then said, "I'm here to find Mr. Holmes." Speaking of this, her gaze unconsciously looked in Sherlock's direction. Seeing this situation, the others understood and smiled as they stood up and walked out. Hermione was the last to leave, but just as she was about to walk out, Hannah suddenly reached out and grabbed her, saying with a pleading expression, "Granger, please don't leave, please." Hermione was a little surprised, and then looked at Sherlock. "Hermione, if you're willing to sit for a while, you might be of great help to me." Hermione was originally quite interested in Hannah coming to find Sherlock, but since everyone else had left, she felt a little embarrassed to stay alone. But now that both Sherlock and Hannah had said so, she simply sat down. "All right, Miss Abbott, now can you tell me what's troubling you?" "How did you know I have troubles?" Hannah Abbott asked in surprise. Chapter 63. Knocking 4 times. When you knock, ordinary people only knock twice, at most 3 times. Sherlock said this when Hannah Abbott asked why he knew she had troubles. "Holmes, your reputation truly precedes you," Hannah Abbott exclaimed in surprise. In fact, she did have troubles. "Well, let's get started as soon as possible." Sherlock clasped his hands together, propping up his chin, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the young witch. Hannah Abbott nodded, took a deep breath, and began to recount the events. "My father works in the Ministry of Magic, in charge of document management. Some time ago, while sorting through a batch of confidential files, he may have misplaced a file due to a moment of negligence. As a result, someone in the Ministry of Magic made a big deal out of it, accusing him of deliberately leaking secrets. Now he faces serious disciplinary action, and may even be sent to Azkaban." Speaking of this, Hannah Abbott's eyes turned red, and her voice trembled. Sherlock did not notice this, or rather, he noticed but didn't care. He opened his notebook and continued to ask. "When your father mentioned this file, did he say anything special? Remember, any detail, no matter how insignificant it seems, may be crucial. Father said that the file was enchanted with a special encryption spell, and could only be opened with a specific magic key. Where was the file kept? Locked in a vault with multiple protective enchantments. Are you sure? Yes, Father said the same thing when questioned by the Ministry of Magic, but it suddenly appeared somewhere else. Hearing this, Sherlock frowned slightly, tapping his fingers gently on the table. After a moment, he asked again. Before the file was discovered, did anything unusual happen in the Ministry of Magic? Unusual things. Hannah Abbott didn't quite understand Sherlock's meaning. For example, did anyone frequently enter and exit your father's office, or were any strange magical fluctuations detected? Hannah Abbott closed her eyes, her brow furrowed, trying hard to recall. Sherlock didn't disturb her, just watched her quietly. Hermione looked at Hannah Abbott, then at Sherlock. The former deep in thought and the latter confident, formed a sharp contrast at this moment. That's right. Hannah Abbott's eyes suddenly lit up. Father said that a few days before the file went missing, the protective magic array in his office had inexplicably experienced a brief fluctuation. But at the time, he conducted a thorough inspection and found nothing unusual, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Sherlock nodded and turned to Hermione. My friend, if someone were to bypass the vault's protections using magic to steal the file, would it cause magical fluctuations? That's for sure, Hermione replied without thinking, then reacted, you mean? Wait, I have a few more questions. Hermione, interrupted by Sherlock, wasn't annoyed. Anyway, she was already used to this style. This guy was just this kind of person. Then Sherlock began to ask in detail about the layout of Abbott's Ministry of Magic office, the location where the files were stored, and the details of his father's daily work routine. Abbott often ran to the Ministry of Magic to play with her father since she was a child, and she could answer Sherlock's questions without hesitation, but the details weren't very clear. But it didn't matter. My mother managed to bring me the Ministry of Magic's investigation report on this matter, and this letter, which is my father's description of the incident. Abbott said, taking out a stack of materials and handing them over. Sherlock, who had been frowning, perked up. Abbott's description could only be used as a reference. This report and Abbott's father's testimony were more useful. He examined it carefully while drawing in his notebook. Unfortunately, the conditions didn't allow him to go to the Ministry of Magic to see it in person. It seemed that he could only learn from Poirot this time. Fortunately, the Ministry of Magic's report was fairly detailed, although there were inevitably some unclear points. It was enough to deduce what happened. I think, the truth has surfaced. Sherlock raised his head and said, in the surprised gazes of Hermione and Abbott. Wasn't that too fast? The person is likely your father's competitor in the Ministry of Magic. He has coveted your father's position for a long time, and this time he seized the opportunity to plan this conspiracy. Mr. Holmes, who are you talking about? Abbott's expression was a bit bewildered. Sherlock said this so suddenly that she couldn't react. Light Black, Mr. Blacklight. It's him. Hannah immediately showed a surprised look. He has no feud with my father. Sherlock shook his head and explained. According to your father's description and the information provided in this report, the file's encryption method is an extremely rare and complex ancient magic encryption technique. Anyone who can crack it must have an in-depth understanding of ancient magic. There are not many people who meet the conditions, and that Mr. Light Black happens to be one of them. In addition, the protective magic of the vault requires cracking at least 3 different types of magical locks at the same time. This not only requires superb magical abilities, but also a thorough understanding of the internal structure of the Ministry of Magic's security system. Light Black happens to be in charge of the security system in the area where your father is located, which seems very suspicious. Besides, Sherlock picked up his notebook, pointed to the sketch he had drawn, and continued. According to this investigation report, Mr. Blacklight entered and exited your father's office more often than usual in the week before the file went missing, and each time he stayed for quite a while. Of course, he claimed that this was just to discuss work. But your father said that most of the so-called discussion content was trivial and unimportant. This is enough to show that he was likely using these opportunities to find the best time to implement the plan, but your father didn't notice it. Also, he has always been jealous of your father's talent. Although this is my inference, I don't think there should be anything wrong with it. Because in the most recent promotion evaluation, he lost to your father, which undoubtedly became a strong motive for him to commit the crime. Abbott was surprised and delighted after hearing Sherlock's analysis. Hermione patted the back of her hand gently, and looked at Sherlock with sparkling eyes. "Holmes, you're amazing. What should we do now?" "Don't worry, Miss Abbott, we still need to gather evidence to prove your father's innocence and that person's guilt. Although the Ministry of Magic has restricted your father's actions, fortunately your mother can still move freely. So next, she needs to have her and your father's friends in the Ministry of Magic pay attention to that person's movements, especially to pay attention to attempts to destroy magical traces related to the file, or whether he has contacted any suspicious people. Also, I suggest you tell Sprout about this. I believe she will provide you with considerable help. At the same time, I will use some means here to further search for evidence." Speaking of which, he turned his head again. "Hermione, please look up information about ancient magic cracking and loopholes in the Ministry of Magic's security system, maybe you can find the key clues to his crime." Hermione couldn't help but be stunned when she heard this. Ancient magic cracking was fine, but what about the loopholes in the Ministry of Magic's security system? Was this kind of thing searchable? Hannah Abbott didn't think so much, and thanked Sherlock with red eyes. Sherlock gave the other party a reassuring smile. "Miss Abbott, the truth will never be buried, as long as we look for it with our hearts, we will definitely find it." Chapter 64. After seeing Hannah Abbott off, Hermione sat across from Sherlock, staring intently at him. "What's wrong, my friend?" "Detective Sherlock, please tell me, where am I supposed to find the security system vulnerabilities in the Ministry of Magic?" "That, hey." Sherlock gently shook his head. "From the case reports the Ministry of Magic provided earlier, I've already discovered some." "Hey." Hermione looked at Sherlock in disbelief. "Unfortunately, even if I know these vulnerabilities, I have no way to exploit them. After all, this is the magical world. If I were 20 years old now, 17 years old should be enough." "Hermione. What, judging by your tone, you're thinking of pulling off a big heist at the Ministry of Magic. But what I really didn't expect is that the magical world actually has its own Scotland Yard. If it were Harry and Ron, they probably wouldn't understand the meaning of this sentence." Hermione understood. "It seems you're very dissatisfied with Scotland Yard." "Ah. Actually, they still have a certain amount of operational capability and basic investigative skills. When dealing with some routine cases, they can methodically collect clues and question personnel. Unfortunately, many detectives there have rigid thinking, often following established case-handling models, lacking innovative thinking and bold reasoning hypotheses. Especially when facing some complex criminal cases, Scotland Yard's response speed and response strategies are often stretched thin. For example, in the burglary case before the start of school, they ignored key clues, which caused the case investigation to fall into a deadlock." Hearing Sherlock mercilessly point out the flaws in Scotland Yard, Hermione didn't know what to say for a moment. She sometimes heard her parents and other elders in her family complain about Scotland Yard's inefficiency, but no one had ever been able to point out the problem as clearly as Sherlock. "What I didn't expect is that the Ministry of Magic is not much better. In fact, this case is very simple, just like I helped others solve problems before. Because I have this ability to analyze things using intuition, they provide me with all the evidence, and then I try to put them on the right track. In fact, all criminal behaviors have very similar aspects. If you know the details of 1,000 cases like the back of your hand, and you can't explain the 1,001st case, that would be strange. If I encounter complex cases, I'm afraid I'll have to run around and investigate myself. The main difficulty in this case is that there are too many clues, and extremely important clues are obscured by irrelevant signs. In fact, the information provided in the Ministry of Magic's report is enough to make inferences, as long as you can select the necessary ones from it and string them together in order. But the Ministry of Magic turned a blind eye to those clues hidden beneath the surface. In fact, the Ministry of Magic gives me the feeling that they just want to close the case as soon as possible." Speaking of this, Sherlock frowned deeply. As for who the real culprit is, they don't care. So even if I have provided the correct ideas, I'm afraid Mrs. Abbott will have to put in a lot of effort to solve this matter. But since she was able to bring out the Ministry of Magic's investigation report, plus Professor Sprout's help, presumably this matter will eventually get a fair result. Speaking of this, Sherlock paused. "Oh right, thank you for reminding me of that lady's name just now." "Ah. Good heavens, so if I hadn't called out Hannah Abbott's name from the start, you wouldn't even have known?" But on second thought, That's right. This guy had said long ago that his brain is like a hard drive, and he never stores information that he considers useless. Forgetting classmates' names is not a one or two time occurrence. Hermione even suspected that if Ron didn't live in the same dormitory as Sherlock, the latter probably wouldn't even remember the former's name. Time is like fine sand between fingers, always slipping away unnoticed. In the process of learning and mastering magical knowledge, taking Harry for morning exercises, teaching Hermione to fly, and helping classmates solve problems, Sherlock has been at Hogwarts for nearly 4 months. This also means Christmas is coming. Like Halloween, this festival, which originally had religious origins, has now evolved into a public holiday in the Western world over time. On this day, everyone exchanges gifts and holds feasts. To add to the atmosphere, Christmas trees, Christmas stockings, Christmas hats, Christmas wreaths, and other festive decorations will also make a shining appearance. It can be said to be quite lively. For the young wizards of Hogwarts, this festival is more important than Halloween. On the one hand, its arrival means the end of the first semester. All teachers and students will usher in a full half-month holiday, and will not return to school until New Year's Day of the second year. On the other hand, the children are full of expectations, waiting for an old man in a red hat and white beard to appear and deliver gifts to them. Of course, in the magical world, it is the owls that truly bear this responsibility. But this does not affect the children's good wishes. The school also made preparations early, allowing all students to register whether they want to stay at school for the festival. The vast majority of students chose to go home. This is also normal. After all, in these full 7 years of school life, there are only 2 opportunities to go home each year. Of course, there are exceptions. I really feel sorry for those people. In a potions class, Malfoy said sarcastically, they have to go to other people's homes for Christmas because their own family doesn't want them. Although he was repeatedly rebuffed, Malfoy still seized every opportunity to antagonize Harry. Of course, because of Sherlock, he didn't dare to be too intense, just secretly stirring up trouble. Now, he has also discovered a fact. If he only takes some not too excessive verbal advantages, Sherlock will ignore him. This discovery made him extremely excited. So naturally he wouldn't let go of this kind of opportunity now. However, this time, not to mention Sherlock, even Harry was too lazy to pay attention to him. Because Harry originally didn't want to go back to Privet Drive to spend Christmas with the Dursleys. So even though Malfoy deliberately looked at Harry when he spoke, and Crabbe and Goyle kept snickering beside him. As a result, Harry was not only not sad at all, but even felt a little funny. This made Malfoy even more gloomy, as if he felt like he had punched cotton. On the contrary, for Harry, this may be the best Christmas he has ever spent in his life. In fact, when Professor McGonagall first came to register the list of students staying at school for the festival, he originally wanted to sign up. Sherlock, I won't be going home for Christmas. No, you're going home. Go home. Harry said in surprise, Sherlock, it's not like you don't know my family's situation. Come to my house, Sherlock said calmly, my parents want to meet my friend. Chapter 65. Sherlock, are you giving me a surprise today? Hearing Sherlock's invitation, Harry's eyes widened in surprise. For him, being able to stay at Hogwarts was already a great option. He never expected that Sherlock would invite him home for the new year. This is definitely a pleasant surprise. Sherlock nodded, then turned to Ron, and you, Ron? Ron was taken aback, pointing at himself, me. Yes, you don't have to stay at school either. Come to my house with Harry. But Ron wasn't originally required to stay at school, right? Hermione asked, puzzled. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are going to Romania to visit Charlie Weasley. Ron and his 3 brothers will be staying at school this time. How do you know? Ron's eyes widened even more than Harry's had, I haven't even told you yet. Sherlock smiled slightly at him, are you sure you want to know? Never mind, you must have deduced it through observation again. Ron said dejectedly. Every time he heard Sherlock's reasoning process, he felt like his IQ was being crushed. So, unless it was necessary, he would rather skip the process. Besides, even if Sherlock didn't say it, he had already vaguely guessed something. After all, he had sent a letter home with an owl just a few days ago. With Sherlock's observation skills, deducing this was simply too easy. In short, at Sherlock's invitation, Harry and Ron would be spending this Christmas holiday at Sherlock's house. Out of a desire to show off, this matter was quickly inadvertently publicized by Ron. After all, Sherlock is now a prominent figure in the school. Although his personality is eccentric, and he offends people easily when he speaks. However, the ability to deduce what someone did yesterday with just one glance still makes all the young wizards admire him. Moreover, as long as you can ignore the nasty side of his personality and just focus on consulting him, it actually feels pretty good. In this case, being able to receive his invitation is undoubtedly something to boast about. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Achoo. Listening to Malfoy's mockery of Harry, Ron said in a muffled voice. With the holiday approaching, Ron caught a cold, and even his voice changed. It's okay. Harry just started to speak, but Sherlock calmly interrupted. Why apologize? You're just stating a fact. Ron. This was the first time Ron felt that Sherlock's words sounded so pleasant. He straightened his back instantly. That's right, Malfoy is the one who made the mistake. What does it have to do with me, Ronald? Potter, talking during class, Gryffindor loses 5 points. By now, Harry was completely used to being docked points for various reasons. Especially after hearing Sherlock's explanation of Professor Snape's true feelings in the first potions class, Harry's gaze towards the other party was completely different. He is, after all, a kind child, and after learning the truth. Of course, he chose to forgive him. So, at this time, he was completely calm and indifferent. This made Snape even more annoyed. Until he reluctantly finished deducting so many points that Gryffindor became Gryffindor's door, the potions class just ended. Everyone left the underground classroom and was stunned to find that the corridor ahead was completely blocked by a huge fir tree. At first, everyone was a little confused, but when they saw the 2 big feet under the tree and heard the loud panting, they immediately understood who was behind the tree. There was only one person in the entire Hogwarts who could do this job without magic, relying only on his own strength. Ron curiously poked his head through the branches and saw a familiar face covered in a beard. Hey, Hagrid, cough, any help? No, I can do it myself, thank you, Ron. Get out of the way, good dog doesn't block the road. Just as the two were having a friendly exchange, Malfoy's voice came from behind Ron. I guess you're probably trying to earn some pocket money, Weasley. Or maybe you hope to guard the gamekeeper's grounds after you graduate from Hogwarts. After all, Hagrid's hut is like a palace compared to your old home. It must be said that Malfoy is quite skilled at being sarcastic. Moreover, after listening to Sherlock's analysis last time, Ron really had such thoughts. So, as expected, he was provoked by Malfoy at this time. However, just as he was about to rush towards Malfoy, he was stopped by Sherlock. Mr. Draco Malfoy. When Malfoy saw Sherlock's gaze turned towards him, he couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, he once again remembered the fear of being dominated by Sherlock that day. Even though he wasn't the one who was beaten. Not just the Weasleys, Hagrid's hut is also a palace compared to your house. Ron, who was still smiling, suddenly froze. Hey, buddy. Why do you have to stab your own people while humiliating the enemy? Holmes, you this WA. Once bitten, twice shy. Malfoy wasn't a fool like Goyle. So when Sherlock's grey eyes looked over, he decisively closed his mouth halfway through his words, then lowered his head and quickly left. A wise man knows when to retreat. Endure. Crabbe and Goyle also followed him closely when they saw this. Sherlock, you really shouldn't have stopped me just now, I almost taught him a lesson. Achoo. Looking at Malfoy's back, Ron said through gritted teeth, his face as red as his hair. Sherlock shook his head and looked aside. That way, you wouldn't be able to teach him a lesson, and you'd get points deducted. Following Sherlock's gaze, everyone couldn't help but gasp. Professor Snape didn't know when he had appeared on the stairs. Although after Sherlock's explanation, everyone already believed that he was not a bad person. But if Ron had really rushed up just now, the unlucky one would definitely be him instead of Malfoy. At this time, Professor Snape slowly walked over, his eyes swept over Ron, and he said coldly. You should really feel lucky, Weasley. If Holmes hadn't stopped you, Gryffindor would have had more points deducted because you laid your hands on someone. Sherlock, luckily you saw it. After Professor Snape turned and left, Harry said admiringly. No, Sherlock, you have to find a chance to let me beat that kid up. Ron spat on the ground, looking at Sherlock with hope. He believed that with Sherlock's abilities, creating such an opportunity would not be difficult. However, what he didn't expect was that Sherlock said bluntly, "You are no match for him." "Ron." "How am I not?" Cough 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 cough. Ron became even more breathless as he spoke. "All right, cheer up, Christmas is coming soon." Hagrid slapped Ron on the shoulder, forcefully suppressing his complaints and coughs. "You should come with me to the Great Hall to take a look, it's wonderful." Chapter 66. Under Hagrid's lead, Sherlock and his 3 companions arrived at the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were already setting up Christmas decorations. Seeing them come over, Professor Flitwick immediately greeted them warmly. "Ah, the last tree is here, Hagrid. Please put it in that corner over there." Once the decorations were complete, the walls were hung with garlands of holly and mistletoe, and 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the hall. Some trees were adorned with glittering little icicles, some twinkled with hundreds of candles, and others needed no extra decoration, being beautiful in their own right. In short, the entire hall was even more beautiful and magnificent than it had been during Halloween. Tomorrow is the official start of the holidays. Looking at the scene, Hagrid turned to Harry. "I heard you're going to Sherlock's house." "Yes, Hagrid." Harry's face beamed with a happy smile. "Sherlock invited Ron and me." "That's wonderful." Hagrid was genuinely happy that Harry had found a friend like Sherlock. He placed his hands on Sherlock's and Harry's shoulders respectively. "I bet this will be the best Christmas you've ever had." Harry nodded, agreeing with him. However, since the news of Sherlock going home for the holidays had spread, many young wizards came to him. The situation felt like everyone was trying to squeeze in one last divination. Under these circumstances, Harry, Hermione, and Ron agreed to meet in an empty classroom. "Ron, are you sure Sherlock didn't follow us?" "I don't think so. He was stopped by that Ravenclaw girl." "That's good. We need to decide this before we leave for the holidays." "Harry, you..." Hermione was about to speak to Harry but noticed that his gaze was still fixed behind them. "Stop looking, Sherlock won't be here for a while." Okay." Harry's face flushed red, and he quickly averted his gaze. "Now, let's discuss what Christmas gift we should give Sherlock." "I still think we should just ask Sherlock directly." Ron grumbled, but when 2 cold stares turned towards him, he promptly shut his mouth. One was the savior, and the other was a top student. Couldn't afford to offend them. "Recently, I took advantage of my free time to compile some information. See if you have anything to add." Hermione pushed a piece of paper in front of the 2 of them, on which was written in neat handwriting. "Sherlock Holmes's scope of knowledge. 1. Literary knowledge, philosophical knowledge none. 2. Astronomical knowledge none, slightly improved after studying astronomy. 3. Political science knowledge superficial. 4. Botanical knowledge fragmentary, knows nothing about practical gardening, very knowledgeable about poisons and dangerous magical creatures. 5. Geographical knowledge limited to practical use, can distinguish different soil types at a glance, can determine which part of the campus based on the color and hardness of mud splatters on his robe after a walk. 6. Chemical knowledge profound. 7. Anatomical knowledge accurate, but unsystematic. 8. Sensational literature very extensive, familiar with almost all horror events that have occurred in the last century. 9. Has extensive practical knowledge of British law. 10. Magical knowledge leaning towards practical application, familiar with the theoretical knowledge and practical operation of transfiguration, charms, potions, and herbology, only familiar with areas of interest in history of magic, the ability of defense against the dark arts is unknown. 11. Plays the violin very well, but never plays it properly." After reading Hermione's summary, Harry and Ron couldn't help but look at each other. "You actually know Sherlock this well?" Harry asked first, genuinely impressed by Hermione. He had been with Sherlock for so long, but he had never been able to summarize him so accurately. "Don't mind the details." Hermione looked impatient. "Is there anything else to add?" "Yes." Harry said decisively, "Sherlock is skilled with sticks, proficient in swordsmanship and boxing." Hermione and Ron looked at Harry in unison. "Why are you looking at me?" Harry was a little embarrassed by their burning gazes. "Stop talking nonsense, tell us how you know." Ron punched Harry. Although Hermione didn't speak, her eyes clearly conveyed the same meaning. Harry cleared his throat. "Since the first day of school, I've been doing morning exercises with Sherlock every day." Ron's eyes widened like copper bells. "Holy hell, Why didn't you ask me to come? Harry immediately glared back. I asked you on the first day, you said you couldn't get up. Ron was a little embarrassed, but he quickly straightened his neck and argued. Then why didn't you ask me later? Just because I didn't go on the first day doesn't mean I wouldn't go in the future. You. Harry was so angry that he jumped, just about to retort when Hermione interjected. You two quiet down for a moment, Harry. Did you know he was good with sticks and swords when you were doing morning exercises with Sherlock? That's right. Harry nodded. Actually, before school started, Sherlock had already said that he had learned boxing and fencing. That was when he dealt with Malfoy and his two friends in the carriage. Oh, so he told me he persuaded them. Is that how he persuaded them? Hermione's eyebrows immediately stood on end. Seeing this situation, Harry and Ron immediately cried out in their hearts. Harry quickly said, let's discuss what gift we should give him first. Hermione snorted. The important thing was the matter at hand, so she stopped discussing the past. After some discussion, the three finally decided on a gift for Sherlock. Harry's gift was a magical magnifying glass. In addition to having the function of an ordinary magnifying glass, it can also detect magical traces and discover special runes and magical fluctuations on magical items. If Hogwarts ever has a case of stolen magical items or traces of magical creatures, this magnifying glass can help Sherlock observe the scene more carefully. This was also inspired by the Hannah Abbott incident. Not long ago, Hannah Abbott made a special trip to find and thank Sherlock. Her father was finally cleared of suspicion and his reputation was restored. The process was a bit tortuous though. Even with new evidence, the Ministry of Magic was still unwilling to re-examine the case. As Sherlock had predicted, they only needed a result. As for whether this result was the truth, they didn't care. Fortunately, Abbott's mother found someone. As a result, Wright Black would face legal sanctions. This incident made Sherlock's reputation at Hogwarts even higher, and more people came to him for consultations. Ron planned to give Sherlock invisible ink and a special quill. This ink can only be revealed under specific magic spells or reagents, making it convenient for him to hide important information, and it is also a good helper for reconnaissance. As for Hermione, she planned to give Sherlock a book. Chapter 67. Hermione planned to give Sherlock the book Magical Crime Case Files. This book collects various criminal cases from the magical world, including dark magic crimes and smuggling of magical items. It was compiled by magical law scholars based on research and practical experience. Hermione thought this was a very suitable reference book for Sherlock, allowing him to understand the characteristics of magical crimes and learn investigation techniques from past cases. After settling on this, the three pretended to be nonchalant and returned, only to see Sherlock still with that Ravenclaw witch. Previously, they were in a hurry to leave and didn't pay attention, but now Hermione suddenly noticed that the girl with Sherlock was surprisingly beautiful. She had waterfall-like black hair and a pretty face, the kind of girl who would leave a deep impression at first glance. When she saw Harry and the others coming over, she politely gave them a smile, then waved goodbye to Sherlock. For some reason, Harry's heart skipped a beat. She's a nice girl, don't you think, mate? After the girl left, Ron whistled and nudged Harry with his elbow. Yes. I think. Hermione glanced at the two and snorted. She vaguely understood why Harry had blushed earlier. Sherlock, was she also here to consult you about a problem? Just a trivial little trouble. Sherlock said calmly. On the morning of the holiday, the Hogwarts Express arrived as scheduled. Sherlock, Harry, Hermione, and Ron happened to occupy a compartment. This scene made Sherlock feel a little dazed. 4 months ago, he took the Hogwarts Express and knocked on the door to the magical world. 4 months later, he was riding the same train with friends from the magical world, returning to the scientific world. Going back and forth, it felt like a lifetime ago. There's not much to say about the journey, after all, at this time everyone is eager to go home for the new year. As for the Malfoy trio, although they were on the same train, they didn't come to provoke them like they did at the beginning of the school year. This made Ron a little regretful. He originally wanted to prove to his three friends that he wouldn't lose to Malfoy in a one-on-one fight. That afternoon, the train stopped at platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station. A wizened old security guard stood at the ticket gate. His task was to only allow 2 or 3 people to pass at a time. Obviously, this would prevent a large group of people from popping out of the wall at the same time and attracting the attention of Muggles. During this process, people kept greeting Sherlock and Harry. "Bye, Holmes," Goodbye, Potter. You're both big celebrities. Ron couldn't help but laugh. Harry shook his head, that's not the case where I'm going, I assure you. Sherlock didn't comment on this. He and Hermione were in the front and Harry and Ron were in the back. The four of them passed through the exit in batches. Because Harry hadn't told the Dursleys that he was returning to London, only Sherlock and Hermione's parents came to pick them up. Coming to the exit, Sherlock saw his targets at a glance. His mother and Mrs. Granger were anxiously looking into the crowd. The two fathers were talking about something slightly behind them. Soon, the two pairs of parents met their children. These two must be Harry and Ron. Mrs. Holmes was very enthusiastic. After giving Sherlock a big hug, she turned her attention to Harry and Ron. This made the two of them feel flattered. Hermione's parents were the same. Even after learning that the two would be staying at Sherlock's house, they still warmly invited them to visit their home. "Dear Jane, let the children come to my place first. In a few days, Tannen and I will take them to visit you." Hearing Mrs. Holmes say this, Mrs. Granger thought about it and agreed. She pulled Sherlock aside and asked him in detail before saying goodbye to the Holmes family. Hermione made a phone call gesture towards Sherlock before leaving. Seeing this scene, Mrs. Holmes and Mrs. Granger both smiled knowingly. Mr. Granger frowned slightly. Is this a car?" Just then, Ron pointed to a car behind Mr. Holmes and asked in surprise. He found that the car had a smooth and elegant shape, and the slender body had simple and smooth side lines. The rear design was simple, and the tail lights had a unique shape, echoing the overall style of the car, giving people a sense of calm and fashion. In the center of the front of the car was a logo with the bow and sail of a sea ship. The word Rover was written in gold above the sail, which looked quite light. When he saw the delicate dashboard and soft seats in the driver's seat, Ron couldn't help but exclaim, "This is much cooler than my family's broken car." Mr. Holmes couldn't help but be curious when he saw Ron's surprised look. As a result, he became even more curious after chatting with Ron. Because Ron said that his father, Mr. Weasley, also had a car. Although that car wasn't as exquisite and beautiful as his own, it could fly. A flying car, wasn't that Kit, the car from Knight Rider? No, according to Ron, his father's car could fly long distances like an airplane. That was even more amazing than Kit. Because of his love for cars, Ron sat in the passenger seat on the way home. He chatted with Mr. Holmes very enthusiastically. The two had even agreed that when the Weasley family returned from Romania during the summer vacation, Mr. Holmes would visit Ron's house. Mainly to see that ultimate flying car. Sitting in the back seat, Mrs. Holmes looked at her excited husband and smiled knowingly. She turned her head and said to Harry, who was sitting next to Sherlock and looked a little restrained. "Harry, you don't have to be so restrained, just think of it as going to your own home." "Harry. What? Am I going to live in the cupboard?" But he quickly realized that Mrs. Holmes didn't mean that. Mrs. Holmes was a very gentle English woman, and Harry seemed to see the shadow of his own mother in her. The two chatted a few more words, and Harry was finally no longer as restrained as he was when they first met. This made Mrs. Holmes very happy. A mother knows her son best. She was originally worried that Sherlock would be like he was at school before at Hogwarts. Lonely, unsociable, and even bullied. Although in the end, those bullies were the ones who suffered. But that wasn't what she wanted to see after all. This was also the reason why she was initially unwilling to let Sherlock study in Scotland. She knew that feeling too well. Far from home, full of sighs, transformed into autumn leaves. She didn't expect Sherlock to be so happy at Hogwarts. In addition to the Granger girl he knew before school started, he actually made other friends. This was simply an unexpected surprise. Because of this, when she learned that Harry and Ron planned to stay at school, she immediately asked Sherlock to invite them to her house for the new year. Through this observation of Harry and Ron along the way, she found that these two young wizards trusted and even admired Sherlock very much. For Mrs. Holmes, this was the thing that made her the happiest. As for whether Sherlock could become a great wizard in the future, that didn't matter. Back on King's Road, Mrs. Holmes went to prepare dinner, and Sherlock led Harry and Ron to the second floor. "Both rooms are empty, you can choose yourselves." "You mean, one room for each of us?" Harry and Ron widened their eyes in surprise. Chapter 68. "Oh, my dear Sherlock, I never thought you were a damn rich man like Hermione," Ron said in an exaggerated manner when he heard Sherlock tell him and Harry to each pick a house. If they were to visit his house, the guests might have to squeeze together with them. Ignoring Ron's words, Sherlock said to the two, "Have dinner and rest early tonight, we're going to Diagon Alley early tomorrow morning." "Diagon Alley? Do you want to buy something?" "Yes, I need your help." "No problem." Harry and Ron agreed readily. Harry was overjoyed to hear that he could help Sherlock. As for Ron, he thought that with Sherlock's family's financial situation, he would never borrow money from him. As long as it's not about borrowing money, anything is negotiable. Mrs. Holmes was a great cook, standing out in the overall poor English culinary world. Although it didn't seem as abundant as the special meals in Hogwarts Holiday Hall, the taste was even better. Ron was a little reserved at first. But after tasting it, he immediately returned to his true colors, using both hands to grab a chicken leg and devour it. Although Harry wasn't as unrestrained as Ron, he ate more than usual. Seeing them eating happily, Mrs. Holmes' eyes turned into two crescent moons. For Sherlock himself, being able to savor the taste of home-cooked meals after a long time was also a pleasant thing. That night, all three young wizards slept soundly. The next day, Sherlock's father drove them to the Leaky Cauldron. The Leaky Cauldron was still as dim and hazy as ever, with few people inside. Fortunately, Harry's appearance didn't cause too much of a stir. "It seems that father has been coming here often recently." When the group passed through the bar and arrived at the small courtyard surrounded by walls, Sherlock suddenly said to Mr. Holmes, "You're right." Mr. Holmes smiled. He wasn't surprised that his son could see this. Harry asked curiously, "Sherlock, how did you figure it out?" "The parking space outside just now is reserved for long-term renters." "Just that simple?" Ron found it a little unbelievable. Mr. Holmes kept smiling. Obviously, his son's friends had also noticed his uniqueness. "I said, as long as you observe carefully, these things are not worth mentioning once you understand them." Besides the parking space, the bartender was obviously treating my father like a regular customer, which also shows that father has been coming here often recently. "That's right," Mr. Holmes added, "although I can't enter Diagon Alley, I can still learn about the magical world through this bar." "Oh, Uncle Holmes, I bet you'll become good friends with my father," Ron said with shining eyes. His father worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office at the Ministry of Magic, and he himself had a strong interest in everything related to Muggles. Meeting Mr. Holmes, who had a strong interest in the magical world, the two would inevitably have common ground. At this time, Harry, under Sherlock's instruction, had already tapped the fixed bricks on the wall with his wand, opening the passage to Diagon Alley. "Sherlock, where are we going?" "Gringotts." This time of year was the off-season, and Diagon Alley didn't have as many people as before the start of school. On the way to Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Sherlock also told his two friends the purpose of his trip. To exchange some Wizarding World currency in the names of Harry and Ron. Both were teenagers from wizarding families, and the annual limit for exchanging British pounds for galleons was much higher than that of Sherlock and Hermione, whose parents were Muggles. Harry and Ron naturally agreed happily. After all, opportunities to help Sherlock were few and far between. He almost never needed help. The process need not be described in detail. With the help of the two, Sherlock finally exchanged enough galleons this time. Harry had seen the small vault his parents left him in the depths of Gringotts, so he was naturally not surprised by this small scene. However, the glittering gold coins directly stunned Ron. He had never seen so much money in his life, and he entered a trance. It wasn't until he unconsciously followed Sherlock to Ollivander's wand shop that he suddenly came to his senses. "Sherlock, what are we doing here?" "Naturally, to buy a wand." Ron revealed a surprised look. "Is your wand broken?" "No, it's your wand." "Me?" Ron pointed at himself, his face full of disbelief. Just as he was about to say something, a gentle voice interrupted him. "Hello, it's rare to see young wizards here at this time." Ollivander slowly walked out from inside, and his eyes lit up when he saw Harry. "Mr. Potter, we meet again." "Hello." Harry greeted Ollivander a little awkwardly. At this time, Sherlock pointed to Ron. "My friend needs a new wand." Ollivander's gaze followed Sherlock to Ron. "This should be a Weasley boy, can you take out your wand and show it to me?" Ron didn't take out his wand, but looked at Sherlock with a puzzled expression. "Sherlock, what exactly is?" "If you haven't forgotten what happened when we first met, you should remember that I told you that you should choose a wand that suits you, otherwise it will affect your spell casting." Sherlock stared at Ron intently, Since the start of school, you have always struggled when casting spells, so I have to trouble Mr. Ollivander to take a look. If it's really a wand problem, then the new wand will be my Christmas gift to you." Ron's eyes welled up with tears. Because he had 5 excellent older brothers, he had always been the one who was ignored at home. Just as he said to Harry when they first met, the eldest brother Bill was the president of the student council, the second brother Charlie was the captain of the Quidditch team, the third brother Percy became a prefect, and the fourth and fifth brothers, the twins, were mischievous, but their grades were excellent. In this case, the family naturally expected the youngest brother Ron to be like them. But then again, even if Ron could do it, it wouldn't be anything special. Because 5 older brothers had already done it before him. Judging from Ron's performance among the freshmen, there was indeed nothing remarkable about him. The only thing worth mentioning was his identity as Harry Potter's friend, the savior of the magical world. Of course, Harry himself didn't have any problems. Ron could also feel that the other party sincerely regarded him as a friend. Hermione was the same since the troll incident. However, even Hermione, as a friend, would only repeatedly correct his pronunciation and posture when he failed to cast a spell. This undoubtedly emphasized that the problem lies with you. But no one thought that the reason why he couldn't cast spells smoothly was a second-hand wand. But Sherlock thought of it. Not only thought of it, but also put everything into practice. Ron's eyes welled up with tears again. Chapter 69. Sherlock. Touched by the scene, Ron couldn't help but sniffle. He immediately turned his head to the side. He couldn't let Sherlock and Harry see him like this. Then he saw Sherlock's father, Mr. Holmes, leaning against the door, smiling at him. "Ron." This was a bit awkward. "Young man from the Weasley family, quickly take out your wand, don't keep this old man waiting." When it comes to dealing with people, Mr. Holmes is obviously much better than Sherlock. Noticing Ron's awkward situation, he immediately spoke to ease the tension. Okay. Ron glanced at Mr. Holmes gratefully, and took out his worn-out wand as he spoke. "I remember every wand I've sold." Ollivander took the wand, gently stroking the worn handle, a deep sense of nostalgia in his eyes. "Ash wood, 12 inches, unicorn hair, originally quite flexible." Speaking of which, his eyes suddenly sharpened. "When you usually use it to cast spells, you should feel a slight sense of stagnation, right?" "That's right. You're absolutely right." Ron nodded emphatically. There hadn't been any customers for a while, so Mr. Ollivander opened up once he finally encountered someone buying a wand. "Just as I expected, it seems that the wizard chooses the wand, but in reality, the wand is also choosing its wizard. Unicorn hair is the most loyal wand core, and ash wood is the most loyal wood, so a wand made from the two combined." "Loyal?" Ron was a little confused. "Loyal," Ollivander said very definitely. "In this case, even if the wand's new owner is a blood relative of the previous one, it will be difficult to control. Or rather, if you weren't the first wand owner's younger brother, you probably wouldn't even be able to cast the most basic spells." Hearing Ollivander's evaluation, Ron's eyes widened in surprise. "So that was the reason. I can only say, thank goodness Mr. Holmes discovered it in time, otherwise it would have affected your progress in learning and casting spells for a long time." Ron's eyes welled up again. However, when he looked towards Sherlock, he found that the latter had already left at some point. Ron couldn't help but smile. That's Sherlock's style. There's nothing else to say about what followed. After a while, a 14-inch willow wand chose Ron. It is worth mentioning that the wand's core material was still unicorn hair. According to Ollivander, unicorn hair can stabilize the casting of spells, while willow is suitable for wizards with great potential within them. In short, 2 words. Loyal. Ollivander had just handed the packaged wand to Ron when Sherlock happened to come back. "Sherlock, what's this?" Looking at the pile of things Sherlock was holding, Harry couldn't help but ask curiously. "Some materials for future use." "Harry." That was as good as saying nothing. But Harry also knew that since Sherlock had given this kind of answer, it meant the time wasn't right. When the time was right, he would naturally tell him the truth. Having known Sherlock for so long, Harry had long been used to convincing himself. As for Ron, who had obtained a new wand, he couldn't wait to try out the feel. The result was a silky smooth experience. The levitation charm, which he had never succeeded at in charms class, worked on the first try. This made him extremely excited. Even after returning to Sherlock's house from Diagon Alley, Ron was still eager to try. Unfortunately, according to the regulations of the British Ministry of Magic, young wizards are not allowed to cast spells outside of school. There's no such restriction at home. Section 3 of the Reasonable Restriction Law for Underage Wizards states that intentionally using magic in front of muggles in a muggle residential area is a criminal act. Sherlock recited the specific content of the regulation as if he were familiar with it. This is a muggle neighborhood. As soon as I cast a spell, the Ministry of Magic will immediately be able to locate my house. Harry and Ron exchanged glances. What kind of restriction law was that? They had never heard of it. But the two of them didn't doubt the accuracy of Sherlock's words at all. After all, he was Sherlock Holmes. That's a bit boring, Ron sighed. If only I had brought back the wizard chess. No, even if I brought my grandfather's set, Sherlock's house doesn't have. No, I do. Sherlock said, taking out 2 sets of wizard chess. Harry, Ron. Sherlock, when did you? The two of them were shocked. Bought it in Diagon Alley today. Sherlock, you're the best. Ron jumped up and gave Sherlock a big hug, then started playing chess with Harry. As for whether using wizard chess in the Muggle world was against the rules? Sorry, they didn't know. Anyway, if Sherlock didn't say it was, then it wasn't. In fact, Sherlock knew very well that he was skirting the edge. Because Hogwarts would only sign the trace agreement with these young wizards during the summer vacation. But as he had just explained to Ron, this was a Muggle neighborhood after all. Playing wizard chess wasn't a big deal. Presumably the Ministry of Magic already knew that Harry Potter was at his house, so they would give him that much face. But once he used magic, the nature of the matter would be different. Sure enough, nothing happened after several games of chess. This also allowed Sherlock to verify his judgment, pointing the way for future actions. The rules of wizard chess are the same as those of Muggle chess, except that all the pieces are alive. Once one's own piece eats the opponent's piece, it will knock it over and drag it off the board. So playing chess feels more like commanding an army in battle. Although both of them were using new chess sets, Ron didn't take long to familiarize himself with the pieces, smoothly making them obey his commands. On the other hand, Harry's pieces didn't trust him at all, and kept giving him various suggestions. Don't send me there, can't you see his horse? Send it, it doesn't matter if it sacrifices itself. Dare to kill my horse. Harry's chess skills were originally not as good as Ron's, and he was even more dizzy from being disturbed by these pieces. As a result, after several games, the whole process was a rush, exhausted. Unsurprisingly, he was defeated by Ron, losing his helmet and armor, and his army was utterly routed. Fortunately, Mr. Holmes saw injustice and drew his sword to help. Only then was he able to stop the decline and turn the tide. When Mr. Holmes, a Muggle, first took over Harry's black pieces, these pieces ignored his instructions or questioned them. But as the game progressed, those unruly pieces became more and more obedient. By the time a game of chess was over, they had almost reached the point of being as easy to control as Ron's white pieces. The situation in the game against Ron also changed from one-sided to back and forth. Looking at the high-spirited Ron and his father, Sherlock was not surprised at all. This was originally within his expectations. He turned to Harry. Harry, in a couple of days we'll go to 4 Privet Drive. What? Harry was stunned, looked at Ron and Mr. Holmes who were immersed in wizard chess, and asked in a low voice, just the two of us? My mother will drive us there then. As for why not his father? He should let him play chess with Ron. Chapter 70. Number 4 Privet Drive, fully known American Samoa. Number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. This is a quiet place that seems unrelated to magic, and it's also where Harry has lived since he was a child. The Sherlock family lives in the Kensington and Chelsea district, located within London. Surrey is located in the southeast of England and is adjacent to Greater London. The distance between the two is only about 20 miles, which is not far. Okay, but what are we going there for? Out of his consistent trust in Sherlock, Harry agreed when Sherlock suggested going to Privet Drive. Then he voiced his question. You should know that the Dursley family doesn't welcome him. There are some things that need to be confirmed with your aunt. Sherlock said, then changed the subject. Harry, have you thought about what gifts to give the professors? No. Harry answered honestly. He really hadn't thought about this question at all. So, the question arises. Does this have anything to do with going to Privet Drive? This question was finally answered when he came to number 4 Privet Drive with Sherlock. The next morning, Mrs. Holmes drove Sherlock and Harry north, out of London. Although Christmas had not yet arrived, the towns they passed along the way already had a festive atmosphere. Arriving at Privet Drive, it was no different from when Harry had left before. At Sherlock's prompting, Harry reluctantly knocked on the door. Soon, a thin blonde woman appeared in his sight. When she saw Harry's appearance clearly, her horse face turned pale in an instant. "What are you doing here?" In an instant, Harry had the urge to turn around and leave. Fortunately, a hand pressed on his shoulder. It was Sherlock. He gently shook his head at Harry, then turned to look at his mother. "Hello, Mrs. Disley." At the same time, Mrs. Holmes stepped forward and gave Aunt Petunia an elegant smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Who are you?" Mrs. Disley looked at this suddenly appearing adult woman with a wary expression. Although on the surface, this is a gentle and intellectual person, since she can appear with Harry at the same time, I'm afraid she is not a normal person. "I am Valida Holmes, my child Sherlock and Harry are classmates at Hogwarts. I apologize for the sudden visit." Sure enough. Even though Mrs. Holmes was impeccable in terms of etiquette, as soon as she heard that her child was attending a magic school like Harry, a look of disgust immediately appeared on Mrs. Disley's face. She was about to speak when she heard her husband's voice from inside the house. "What's the matter, dear?" "Shampoo sales, they'll be gone soon." Turning her head and shouting, Mrs. Disley immediately turned back and said to Mrs. Holmes in a low voice. "You are not welcome here, you better leave before my husband gets angry." Looking at Aunt Petunia, who was a little exasperated, Harry couldn't have been happier. Mrs. Holmes still maintained her elegant smile. "Mrs. Disley, Harry often mentions you at school, saying that you take great care of him." "Petunia. You're kidding me." Although she and her husband had indeed raised this nephew for 10 years, it couldn't be described as taking great care of him. Of course, in Aunt Petunia's opinion, their family has been able to do what they have done to this extent, which is already benevolent. She was planning to drive this family and Harry away again, but Sherlock suddenly interjected. "Madam, you don't want your husband to lose his job, do you?" "Petunia." Before she could speak, she heard Sherlock continue. "I think Mr. Disley is probably going to invite 2 guests to his house for dinner today, right?" Mrs. Disley's light-colored eyes suddenly shrank. "If I'm not mistaken, this should be the biggest deal Mr. Disley has made in recent years, right?" Mrs. Disley's pale face was deathly white. "It can be seen that you have made a lot of preparations for this, but once they know," Sherlock said as he took out his wand from his arms. He originally wanted to rely on the power of language and action to threaten. But he didn't expect that such a simple action would have an incredible impact on Mrs. Disley. She first let out a scream, then quickly covered her mouth. At the same time, a red-faced fat man rushed out of the room. When he saw this scene, the veins on his temples were exposed, and his red face turned into a purple potato. Seeing this situation, Sherlock immediately realized that the influence of magic on this family was far greater than he had imagined. So he changed his strategy accordingly. "So, aren't you going to invite us in to sit down?" Sherlock gently stroked the wand in his hand, and said so. Mrs. Holmes, who was watching this scene, shook her head gently. She had tried her best, but unfortunately her son's method was more useful. 5 minutes later, Mrs. Holmes, Sherlock, and Harry, who looked incredible, were sitting in the Disleys' living room. For Harry, this was the first time he had been treated as a guest by the Disley family. This feeling was very novel. Uncle Vernon said with a dark face, "Speak, what do you want?" Sherlock's gaze swept over the Disley family of 3. Although he had heard Harry talk about his uncle, aunt, and cousin more than once, and had a relatively clear understanding of the 3 through his description. But after actually meeting them and observing them in person, he obviously got more information. It can be said that although Harry is the Disley couple's nephew, he doesn't look like this family at all. Vernon is a red-faced fat man, tall and burly, with almost no neck, and a very thick beard. Petunia is a thin blonde woman, the opposite of her husband, with a neck almost twice as long as a normal person, a large frame, and a horse face. Their son Dudley inherited his mother's blonde hair and his father's fat body, with fair skin and his facial features almost piled together. As for Harry, there is no need to say more, his thin body and a pair of green eyes are the most obvious characteristics. There is no need for you 2 to be so nervous. Mrs. Holmes still maintained her smile. She looked at her son. Sherlock nodded, and turned to Harry's Aunt Petunia. "I just want to know some things about Harry's mother. As far as I can see, Mrs. Disley should know something about this." "Impossible, absolutely impossible." As soon as Sherlock finished speaking, Mrs. Disley immediately interrupted him with a scream. Harry spread his hands helplessly. He had known that this would be the result. After all, after learning about the magical world from Hagrid, Harry had asked Aunt Petunia about this more than once. But she refused to say anything. But today, Harry looked at Sherlock with expectant eyes. Maybe his friend can do it. After all, he is Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 71. It seems Madam knows quite a bit about magic. Mrs. Disley's reaction was naturally within Sherlock's expectations. Under her nervous gaze, he said calmly. "In that case, Madam must have heard of the legilimency spell." Harry looked at Sherlock in shock. "Hey, buddy, what are you planning?" Sherlock's demeanour at this moment could be described as polite and impeccable, but his words sent a chill down the Disley family's spines. "I think just the name should tell you what this spell is, for it can forcibly read other people's memories." He once again took out his wand and gently stroked it. "Madam, you wouldn't want me to use magic to force you to comply, would you?" "Harry." "Sherlock." Harry was stunned. Although he knew Sherlock was deliberately saying this to extract information. But, this expression, this action, this tone. He couldn't help but want to shout. "Why are you so skilled?" Faced with the polite Sherlock, the Disley couple finally gave in. Both of them keenly realized that they must not treat this classmate of Harry's as a child. Especially Mr. Disley, who could be considered a man who had seen the world. So he discovered that the demeanour and temperament of Sherlock and his mother were no different from those bigwigs he had seen in high society. Petunia knew her husband very well, and she knew what he was thinking just by looking at his expression. "All right, since you want to know." She took a deep breath and slowly spoke about Lily Potter, Lily Evans at the time. "Your mother Lily." Her voice was a little stiff, and the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, as if suppressing some emotion. She was different from a young age. Strange things always happened around her, such as making withered lilies bloom again. "I remember once, she accidentally fell from a tree, but she landed lightly on the ground, as if something was holding her up. Until the summer she was 11, she received a letter from an owl, just like you." About half an hour later, Petunia finished her narration intermittently. Harry lowered his head, immersed in sadness. Sherlock frowned. Mrs. Disley's narration did provide some additional information. For example, Lily knew a boy living in the impoverished Spinner's End area long before entering Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. That boy was always gloomy, wearing old clothes, and his hair was greasy. The two were very close and went to Hogwarts together, becoming classmates. It's just that after entering school for a few years, they quarreled for some unknown reason. But even so, as the biological sister of Harry's mother, the information she provided was still less than imagined. And most of it was about things before Lily got married. According to Petunia, the two sisters had lost contact since Lily married Potter. Until 10 years ago. Mrs. Disley found the swaddled baby Harry in a letter in a startled scream when she opened the door one morning to put out milk bottles. That letter was written by Dumbledore, and she learned about the death of Harry's parents through that letter. Nevertheless, in order for her family to continue living a normal life, she had never told Harry about magic all these years, and told Harry that they died in a car accident. "Thank you very much for your statement, Mrs. Disley." Sherlock smiled, "but I still think you might as well make things clearer." "What are you saying?" Mrs. Disley immediately became vigilant. "I've told you everything I know." "Really?" Sherlock shook his head, and then said something that shocked everyone present. "Actually, you envy your sister, don't you?" "I don't, I didn't, you're talking nonsense." Hearing Sherlock say that she envied her sister, Mrs. Disley immediately began to explain in a panic. Mr. Disley immediately hugged his wife tightly, looking at her with concern, and then turned his gaze to Sherlock. "Boy, watch your tone." Unfortunately, Sherlock was not Harry, so he naturally wouldn't be intimidated by Mr. Disley. He looked into Mrs. Disley's eyes and said calmly. "You and Professor Dumbledore didn't just exchange letters this one time, did you? You had already communicated before Harry's mother entered school. Didn't you also want to become a witch?" You. Mrs. Disley stood up abruptly, looking at Sherlock in a panic. She lost her composure. Sherlock's words couldn't help but remind her of her teenage years, that summer blown by the wind. Although it was a euphemistic reply, it was a ruthless rejection. A letter sent 20 years ago was now like a sharp knife, ruthlessly piercing her heart. Finally, the time you decided to sever ties with the magical world was not when Harry's parents got married. He took a deep look at Mrs. Disley. According to my speculation, that time should have been shortly after Harry's mother entered Hogwarts. Harry. The number of times Harry showed this expression today even exceeded the day he first met Hagrid 4 months ago. Aunt Petunia had contacted Headmaster Dumbledore a long time ago. Aunt Petunia knew Professor Snape a long time ago. Aunt Petunia envied his mother? It sounded absurd, but when it came from Sherlock's mouth, it became incredibly convincing. You said you wouldn't use that kind of magic on us. Mr. Disley hugged his wife tightly, roaring at Sherlock, how can you go back on your word? Sherlock was a little helpless. Deducing these things doesn't require magic at all, just like I can see that you are going to invite Mr. and Mrs. Mason to dinner tonight. Impossible, absolutely impossible. This time, it was Mr. Disley's turn to lose his composure. All right, it seems I have to explain. Sherlock seemed a little bored, he said lazily. When Mrs. Disley opened the door for us, she was obviously still in the cooking state. The dishes and drinks in the kitchen indicate that this is for dinner preparation. If it were lunchtime, there wouldn't be enough time. There are 2 extra pairs of guest slippers prepared in the shoe cabinet in the entrance hall, 1 pair in men's size and 1 pair in women's size, and the styles are formal and decent, not the kind your family uses. The newspapers on the table all have reports about the same company, and its owner happens to be Mr. Mason. Many of the contents have been traced with a pen. The dining table is covered with a clean and tidy tablecloth, and the number of plates, knives, forks, and wine glasses corresponds to 5 people, which is obviously prepared for reception. The golf ball ornaments on the living room display shelf and the landscape oil painting of the golf course on the wall were obviously just hung up. Based on these, I can make a double deduction: you are going to host Mr. and Mrs. Mason tonight. Mr. Mason likes to play golf, and you hope to bring the topic to your work during dinner, so as to complete this order. There was silence. The Disley family was completely stunned. Mrs. Holmes looked at her son with pride. Harry proudly puffed out his chest, feeling honored. Chapter 72. Even after leaving number 4 Privet Drive and sitting Indiana the back of the car, Harry felt like he was still in a dream. His hands tightly clutched a photo album. This was his biggest gain from the trip. Through the conversation with Mrs. Disley, Sherlock easily deduced that despite her complaints, she still kept traces of her sister's life. He then offered the special slimming pills and anti-hair loss shampoo he had bought in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Disley wasn't stupid, she gave his nephew a Christmas gift in advance. Photos of Lily when she was young. Interestingly, Mrs. Disley initially told her husband that Sherlock was there to sell shampoo. Unexpectedly, she actually accepted the shampoo. Even more interesting was that the main ingredient in this anti-hair loss shampoo was still a hair growth potion from the Potter family. It's hard to say if this counts as exporting and then reselling domestically. Due to the Disley family's friendly attitude, Sherlock additionally gave Dudley 2 bags of chocolate frogs when leaving. Dudley was naturally overjoyed, ignoring his parents' stern looks as he accepted the gift. Sherlock, thank you so much. Before Sherlock could speak, Mrs. Holmes, who was driving, laughed. Without turning her head, she said, "Don't say that, dear Harry, you and Sherlock are friends. Isn't it natural for friends to help each other?" Sherlock nodded, agreeing with his mother's statement, then pointed to the photo album Harry was looking at. "I suggest sending this photo to Professor Snape, it should be the best Christmas gift for him." It was a photo of the 2 of them together. The youthful girl had fiery red hair that was slightly curled at the ends, playfully resting on her shoulders. Her fair skin had a faint blush, her nose was straight and delicate, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, revealing 2 shallow dimples. Her smile was as bright and warm as the sun, capable of dispelling any gloom. As many people had said, her deep emerald green eyes were exactly like Harry's, clear and bright. As for the boy whose arm she was holding, aside from his somewhat familiar appearance, his identity was obvious just from his oily, seaweed-like hair. Harry suddenly understood why Sherlock had asked him what gifts he was going to give the professors. He had been waiting for this. However, he was still a little hesitant. Were my mom and Professor Snape really good friends? Obviously. Sherlock said in a confident tone, although we don't know exactly why they parted ways, he still feels deep guilt for not protecting your mother. But, is Professor Snape really not related to Voldemort? Harry asked doubtfully. I wanted to tell you last time, when he looked at me at the beginning of the term, the scar on my forehead hurt. Hearing Harry's words, the initially languid Sherlock immediately became serious, his hands supporting his chin, his eyes fixed on Harry. Your scar hurt when you made eye contact with Professor Snape. Yes, Harry honestly described his feelings at the time, although that burning pain disappeared immediately, it really hurt at that moment, and it had never happened before. Sherlock pondered for a moment, then slowly asked. Are you sure it was caused by eye contact with Professor Snape? Not like at the Quidditch match. Yes, wait, Sherlock, what do you mean? Hearing Sherlock mention the Quidditch match, Harry immediately remembered the situation at the time. Everyone thought Snape was trying to sabotage him and throw him off his broom, but Sherlock pointed out that he was actually protecting him. You may have forgotten. Sherlock said quietly, the person sitting next to Snape at the time was Quirrell. Harry. As Christmas approached, the festive atmosphere became stronger and stronger. Ron initially complained about Sherlock and Harry going to Privet Drive without him. But he was quickly attracted by other new things. First, it was playing wizard's chess with Mr. Holmes. Mr. Holmes's level was quite remarkable. The two were evenly matched, meeting a worthy opponent. It was much more interesting than playing chess with Harry. Recently, he had become fascinated with television. He found it very interesting that a box could play moving scenery and character images without magic, and could also make sounds. A few days later, Hermione and her parents also came to Sherlock's house. She had been back home from Hogwarts for almost a week, and with Christmas fast approaching, Sherlock hadn't even called her once. Finally, Hermione couldn't wait any longer and made a phone call. Mrs. Holmes, who answered the phone, immediately seized the opportunity and invited the Grangers to visit. Mr. Granger was quite critical of this, they clearly said they were coming to our house. But Mrs. Granger didn't think it was a big deal. Honey, don't worry about the details, as long as the children are happy. However, Hermione didn't intend to let some people off so easily. Sherlock, didn't you say you were going to call? Hermione put her hands on her hips, looking at Sherlock with a dissatisfied expression. Sherlock. Harry and Ron couldn't help but chuckle. It was so rare to see Sherlock suffer. And you too. Harry, why didn't you remind Sherlock to call? Ron, if you can't make a phone call, you can always send a letter with an L, right? Harry, Ron. Seeing Hermione like this, Mrs. Holmes and Mrs. Granger couldn't help but giggle. It's so good to be young. Yes, it's so good. As for Mr. Granger, he was watching the news with Mr. Holmes in front of the television while discussing in a low voice. It's really a time of turmoil. Mr. Holmes shook his head slightly as he watched the bald man giving a passionate speech in the news. Damn it, how did the country become like this? The usually gentle Mr. Granger cursed extremely rarely. If this continues, this country will become a laughingstock in the international community. Mr. Holmes glanced at him with some surprise, he didn't realize that Hermione's father had this side to him. I suggest you go to the bank to borrow some rubles and exchange them for pounds. Mr. Holmes stared at the news for a while, and said cautiously to Mr. Granger, don't make the amount too large. Mr. Granger was taken aback, do you also think? It's hard to say, it's just a possibility. Mr. Granger pondered for a moment, then found his wife to discuss it. In the end, the two decided to listen to Mr. Holmes's advice and go to the bank tomorrow. The Granger family and the Holmes family were already very familiar with each other. He still trusted Sherlock's father's vision. Sherlock naturally saw the actions of the two families. However, politics was a bit too distant for him, an 11-year-old boy, and it wasn't something he should be concerned about right now. But after learning that magic existed in this world, Sherlock couldn't help but wonder. If this giant really falls, will it affect the magical world? Chapter 74. Hermione was very angry. She was already unhappy that Sherlock hadn't contacted her during the holidays. Now, upon hearing that Sherlock had actually taken Harry to Privet Drive, she was naturally even more displeased. Why wasn't she invited to such an interesting event? Unfortunately, it was too late to say anything now. In the end, at Ron's strong suggestion, Sherlock compensated by playing several of their favorite violin pieces in a row. Ron had seized an opportunity this time. Sherlock played the violin very well, even able to play some difficult pieces. However, He just didn't play properly. During his time living at Sherlock's house, Ron had endured Sherlock's ear-splitting solos more than once. Every evening, Sherlock would lean back in his armchair, place the violin flat on his lap, and play randomly with his eyes closed. The sound was sometimes high-pitched and melancholic, sometimes strange and cheerful, and sometimes harsh and grating, like sawing wood. Ron suffered terribly. Only Mr. and Mrs. Holmes seemed to have long been accustomed to it. Harry didn't say a word. In this situation, Ron could only run to his bedroom and shut the door tightly. However, Sherlock's violin playing was extremely penetrating, and he could hear it even through the door. It really made him miserable. Now that Hermione, this strong reinforcement, had arrived, he decisively seized the opportunity to make a request. In the end, a result that satisfied everyone was achieved. Hermione's anger dissipated. Ron also breathed a long sigh of relief. He even thought that if this situation continued for a few more days, he would probably explode. The Granger family of 3 left after dinner. Hermione was still a little reluctant. But she could only repeatedly urge Sherlock again as she left, telling him to call or send a letter by owl. A few more days passed, and the time finally came to December 25, 1991. Christmas Day. On this day, Mr. Granger's angry words from a few days ago came true. The unbreakable alliance that became a self-defeating alliance really became a laughingstock in the international community. It is no exaggeration to say that the collapse of the alliance is the most far-reaching major international event affecting the Muggle world order since World War II. As for whether this matter will have an impact on the magical world, it is still unknown for the time being. However, for the young wizards attending Hogwarts, this matter obviously has little impact. Not to mention that many people simply don't know, even if they do, they are more concerned about what Christmas gifts they received than this matter. When Sherlock, Harry, and Ron woke up in the morning, gifts had already appeared in their respective rooms. This is also a benefit of the magical world. Owls can replace the old man in the red hat and white beard to deliver Christmas gifts to them. Sherlock stared at a large pile of packages in silence. He was a little surprised. So many people actually sent him gifts? Surprise! Merry Christmas! Just as he was pondering, Harry and Ron suddenly pushed open Sherlock's door. Obviously, the two were planning to give him a surprise. But when they saw the room piled full of packages, they couldn't help but gasp at the same time. Hiss! Sherlock, you actually received so many gifts. In fact, when Harry woke up in the morning and saw the small pile of packages placed at the foot of his bed, he was already very surprised. Coincidentally, Ron knocked on his door at this time, and he immediately excitedly pointed these out to the latter. Come and see, I received several gifts. What did you think you'd receive? Cabbages. Ron laughed at himself after saying this. His pile of packages was much larger than Harry's. This was normal, as he had many more relatives and friends than Harry. The two put their heads together and decided to go find Sherlock first. Then they saw this shocking scene. After a while, Ron came back to his senses and pointed to a bulging paper package and said, "This must be from my mom." Ron, have you finally learned to reason through observation like Sherlock? I saw the same gift in your room just now. Ron pouted and said, she should have knitted one of those Weasley family-specific sweaters for each of you. Well, I think Hermione must have received one too. At Harry and Ron's strong suggestion, the three of them took the gifts they received and unwrapped them together. As Ron expected, Mrs. Weasley had indeed sent Sherlock a blue hand-knitted sweater with a capital S embroidered on the chest. Harry's sweater was green with an H embroidered on the chest, and Ron's was purplish-red with an R embroidered on the chest. A large box of homemade fudge was also included with the sweater. The taste was also very good. Next was Hagrid. He gave each of them a handmade flute, which was slightly rough but particularly sturdy. Hermione's gift was more interesting. She gave Harry a box of horseshoe-shaped chocolates and Ron a large box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Sherlock received a book. To Harry and Ron's surprise, this book was not the magical crime case files that they had discussed before, but How to be a charismatic speaker. There was also a note on the cover with a line written in delicate handwriting, "Study hard. Sherlock. Harry, Ron." Sherlock opened the title page and found the following sentence written on it. This book provides exclusive recipes for language communication skills, allowing you to become a speaker who is silent until he speaks, and then amazes the world. Sherlock. Seeing Sherlock's silence, Ron finally couldn't help but ask, "Sherlock, what did you give Hermione? It wouldn't be a book too, would it? Harry guessed. It's a book. Harry and Ron pricked up their ears. The title is Learn Makeup from Zero. Harry and Ron immediately gasped. Good heavens! Are you two hurting each other here? I don't understand. Harry said he couldn't understand. Why would you give Hermione that kind of book? Sherlock's gifts to himself and Ron were very practical. A wand was undoubtedly a timely gift for Ron, and the wizard chess was also passable for himself. How did the style suddenly change when it came to Hermione? When giving gifts, you must consider actual needs. Harry. Sherlock, let me ask, do you think Hermione needs to learn makeup and dress up? Obviously. Harry and Ron looked at each other. It turned out like this. No wonder Hermione gave you this book in return, and even withdrew the magical crime case files that she had prepared long ago. That what gifts did you give to others? Since the topic was brought up, Harry became interested and asked. Professor Dumbledore is getting a periodontal checkup and free teeth cleaning for the third year in a row. Professor McGonagall is getting a set of British-style tea sets. Professor Snape is getting a small freezer for long-term storage of medicines. Professor Flitwick is getting a music box that can be charged or powered by batteries. Professor Sprout and Hagrid both got books, home gardening ornamental atlas and complete collection of rare wild animals. Hearing Sherlock's unthinking answer, Harry and Ron couldn't help but look at each other. So the question is, the gifts given to the professors and the two of them were very normal, so why did the style suddenly change when it came to Hermione? Why is this? Why? Forget it, things have come to this point, it is useless to say more. Anyway, their gifts have been sent, as for Sherlock and Hermione. Whatever. In the process of unwrapping the gifts next, the two understood why Sherlock would receive so many gifts. Dear Holmes, I sincerely thank you for covering for me again and again in Charms class, your faithful Seamus Finnegan. To Holmes, thank you for recommending an excellent seeker to the team. Of course, it would be even better if you could join us. Oliver Wood, who welcomes you at all times. Sherlock, thank you for helping me find Leaf every time. Neville Longbottom. Holmes, thanks to you, my father was able to get rid of suspicion. I wish you a Merry Christmas. Hannah. Abbott's whole family. Mr. Holmes, thank you for solving my problem. Cho Chang. It was not until this time that Harry and Ron understood how many good things Sherlock had done behind their backs. Although this sounds a bit weird, it is indeed the case. That Sherlock, have you ever considered being a detective in the future? Dear Harry, my childhood dream was to be a pirate. This. Harry suddenly didn't know what to say. Wait, tell me first, what is a detective? Thus, a morning slowly passed in the calm conversation of the three. After lunch, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes went out for a walk, and the three friends stayed indoors. Harry and Ron restarted the wizard chess for Ron, playing the king's game every day, occasionally playing bronze is also a good adjustment. Sherlock was staring at the wall in a daze. If no one reminded him, he might continue like this for an afternoon. Until Hermione called. She stiffly told Sherlock that Mr. Granger had taken Mr. Holmes's advice and borrowed some rubles from the bank. Judging from the current situation, he must have won this transaction. I just don't know if it's a small win, a medium win, or a big win. When she found that Sherlock was responding perfunctorily and did not explain the Christmas gifts, she angrily hung up the phone. Soon after, the phone rang again, and Hermione talked endlessly about the other gifts she received. It can't be said to be satisfactory, at least it is passable. However, Sherlock still made no indication. Hermione hung up the phone again in anger. After that, Sherlock proposed to go for a walk outside, and didn't let Harry and Ron follow. As soon as Sherlock left, Ron took the lead and said, "Actually, sometimes I also think Hermione is very annoying." Sherlock must not want to answer Hermione's call before leaving. Obviously. Hey, buddy, don't learn Sherlock's way of speaking. Do I? Obviously. You still have the nerve to say me. The two were arguing when the phone rang again. Harry and Ron couldn't help but look at each other, and then made the same choice: ignore it. However, to their dismay, Hermione seemed to have made up her mind and refused to give up, insisting on making this call. What perseverance! Ron shook his head and nudged Harry with his elbow. Go, old Harry, you know, I can't handle this stuff. Harry sighed a long time, stepped forward and picked up the microphone. and the originally tenacious ringtone came to an abrupt end. "Hermione, Sherlock has gone out." To Harry's surprise, there was first a silence on the other end of the phone, followed by the voice of a strange man. "Are you Harry Potter, or Ron Weasley?" Harry said, "Who are you?" The strange man chuckled, "Me? I am the person who is most like a friend that Sherlock Holmes can make." "What are you saying? What does that mean?" Harry was shocked and quickly gestured to Ron. Ron looked at Harry in confusion. Harry was very anxious, gesticulating and mouthing, finally making Ron understand what he meant. Ron didn't say a word, and immediately went out to find Sherlock. The strange man on the other side seemed unaware and continued in a calm voice. "Enemies, at least he thinks so. If you ask him, he might say I'm his nemesis, haha, he just likes to exaggerate, am I right, Mr. Harry Potter?" "How did you?" The surprise in Harry's heart grew stronger and stronger. This mysterious man knew that he and Ron were on the phone as soon as he answered the phone, and now he has further narrowed the scope and directly located him personally. "Didn't you just let Mr. Weasley leave?" The voice laughed. "It seems that Holmes must not have told you that making other movements while speaking will affect the vocal cords? Also, your friend's movements are a bit too big, and the sound of opening and closing doors can be heard from several feet away. Who exactly are you?" "I said, I am Sherlock Holmes' nemesis, so, are you going to continue to be friends with him?" "That's none of your business." "That's hard to say." The voice laughed again, the laughter filled with joy. "The reason I'm calling is to tell you that I'm willing to pay you a considerable amount of money on a regular basis, as long as you do me a favor." "What favor?" Harry, who was already vigilant, raised his attention again. "Information. No need to pry into people's privacy, and it won't embarrass you, just tell me what he's doing." "Why, who exactly are you, and what is your purpose in doing all this?" This was the third time Harry had asked about the other person's identity. However, the other party still avoided answering the question. "Because he always makes me worry, I care about his life a lot, but for various reasons, I hope you can keep this a secret." "I won't agree." "Calm down, Mr. Potter, I haven't even mentioned the specifics of the reward yet. It has nothing to do with that. I'm just not interested, and besides, Sherlock is my friend, I won't help you do something like this," Harry said decisively. "Do you not trust anyone except Sherlock Holmes?" For some reason, even though Harry had refused, the voice on the other end didn't sound angry at all, but instead became lighter. "Or should I talk to Mr. Ron Weasley? As far as I know, he is not very well off, and I imagine he would be happy to help me." Chapter 75. Ever since receiving that mysterious phone call, Harry had become worried. Although he didn't know who the other party was, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Even without Sherlock's wisdom, the fact that the person could easily deduce his identity and claim to be Sherlock's nemesis meant he couldn't be a good person. More importantly, even though he had made his position clear, the other party didn't care. He even said he would change the target to Ron, capital letter M circled. Harry was very worried about this. Unfortunately, by the time the other party hung up, neither Sherlock nor Ron, who had gone to look for him, had returned. Harry waited for over an hour before the two finally arrived late. Looking at the composed Sherlock and the panting Ron, Harry was initially puzzled. "Weren't you going to find someone? How did you end up like this?" He looked at Sherlock, then at Ron. "You. Dude, I'm convinced this time," Ron said intermittently, to actually be able to exercise with this guy every morning." Sherlock glanced at Ron. "It was just a short jog." "Jog? You call that a jog?" Ron seemed to want to retort, but he coughed twice when he spoke anxiously, and his face turned red. Never mind, say what you want, I'm going to rest." After saying this, Ron ignored the two of them, dragged his heavy steps to his bedroom, and fell straight onto the bed. If it were normal times, Harry would definitely follow up to show concern. But today's situation was special. Coincidentally, he didn't want Ron to hear what he was about to say, so he pulled Sherlock aside and said to him in a low voice. "Why are you so late? Didn't Ron tell you?" "Yeah," he said. "Hermione called again, asking me to come back quickly. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I took him for a couple of laps." Harry. Suppressing the urge to curse, Harry took a deep breath. It wasn't Hermione. Just now, someone claiming to be your enemy called, he. "Oh, which one? Harry was stunned. What, do you have many enemies? He claims to be your nemesis. Oh. Did he pay you to monitor me? Sherlock asked calmly. Harry was extremely surprised. He could guess that? Yes. Did you agree to it? No. What a pity, you should have agreed, and then we could split the money. Harry. After a series of questions and answers, Harry found that he couldn't keep up with Sherlock's train of thought. He had to interrupt the conversation and ask. Wait a minute. Who exactly is he? Someone who never tires of trying to trick me, someone who always tries to teach me how to do things, and also the most dangerous person you know. Hearing Sherlock say this, Harry was horrified. More dangerous than Voldemort? In some ways, yes. Harry. This is too terrible. Hearing this answer, Harry didn't hesitate and explained the entire phone call in detail. He emphasized the possibility that the other party might go after Ron. But to Harry's dismay, even though he spoke very seriously, Sherlock didn't seem to care, looking nonchalant. Please tell Ron that if the other party finds him, he must consider it carefully. I can split the money with him too. Harry. Sherlock, you. However, before Harry could get angry, Sherlock interrupted him. Let's not talk about this, let's talk about the arrangements after returning to school this time. What? Sherlock ignored Harry's surprised gaze and quickly said what he wanted to do after returning to school. First, explore the castle, second, break into the Forbidden Forest, and third, force Quirrell. The arrangements were clear. On the one hand, it was to train Harry's abilities, but more importantly, it was to make Harry understand his situation. According to Dumbledore's original intention, the Savior should face the Dark Lord directly. However, Sherlock scolded him mercilessly. In Sherlock's view, even if there was a reason to make Harry face Voldemort, he should tell Harry the truth and let him make his own choice. Instead of being dishonorable and deceiving an 11-year-old wizard. Some people have been in high positions for too long and only hear support and praise. When there are fewer and fewer voices daring to question, it is inevitable that people will become addicted to it. If it weren't for Sherlock, with Dumbledore's sophistication and Harry's personality, the two would definitely hit it off and go both ways. Is this good? This is not good. Fortunately, Dumbledore is essentially a positive character. So he was not ashamed and angry because Sherlock raised the question, and then solved the person who raised the question. After careful consideration, he finally agreed with Sherlock's point of view. Of course, this was also because Sherlock carefully analyzed Dumbledore's behavior and deduced his reaction before speaking out. Otherwise, he would definitely change to other methods. After Sherlock told Harry all of this, the latter was silent for a long time. Sherlock, do you mean that Dumbledore wants me to face Voldemort directly? He believes in that prophecy very much. Speaking of this, Sherlock also frowned. Obviously, he didn't tell me everything and is still hiding something. He won't hurt me, will he? There is no doubt about that. Then, just tell me what to do. Sherlock smiled. Harry, you do have a talent for listening and executing. With your help, many things become easier. But let's talk about the specifics after we return to school. It wasn't until Harry returned to his room that he suddenly woke up. Wait, wasn't I going to ask about the identity of that mysterious person? Why did the topic end up on me again? This made Harry very depressed. Because he realized at this time that he had been tricked by Sherlock again without realizing it. But he also knew that if Sherlock didn't want to tell him, there was nothing he could do even if he tried everything. But then again, if he didn't figure this out, he wouldn't be able to sleep for the next few nights. The next day, after careful consideration, Harry told Ron and Hermione about this. What, that mysterious person asked you and Ron to monitor Sherlock? In that case, why didn't he call me? Harry. Hermione, now is not the time to discuss this. Why not? According to you, since he has targeted you and Ron, he should naturally think of me. I was the first to know Sherlock. Harry, Cloud blood Cloud. But his purpose is to monitor, and Ron and I live in the same dormitory as Sherlock. After a brief silence, Hermione asked again as if nothing had happened, what did Sherlock say? He wouldn't tell me, he only said that Ron and I could agree to the other party's request, and then split the money with him. How can he do this? He's just too irresponsible. No way I'm coming over. Hey? Haven't you been here a few days ago? Ron, who had been guarding the phone because of the false alarm yesterday, suddenly said this. As soon as he said this, Harry immediately secretly said that it was going to be bad. Sure enough, the next moment, Hermione's sharp voice almost pierced their eardrums. Ronald! What do you mean by that? Hermione bombarded Harry and Ron with high decibels for a quarter of an hour before angrily hanging up the phone. Harry and Ron looked at each other, their expressions a little dazed. You shouldn't have told her. I didn't know her reaction would be so big. Harry spread his hands, but it's good that she can come, she's smarter than us, maybe she really has a way to get the truth from Sherlock. I said, aren't you too nervous? Ron said a little puzzled, since Sherlock doesn't care, it means this matter is not a big deal at all. But he also said that is the most dangerous person I know, more dangerous than Voldemort. Hey, don't mention that name again. I just want to say it, Voldemort, Voldemort, Voldemort. Okay, I was wrong, you are my brother, you are my own brother, okay. Ron rolled his eyes helplessly. He suddenly realized that Harry was no different from Hermione. Their concern for Sherlock was a little too much. They don't even think about it, what kind of person is Sherlock? That is a person who can tell you clearly what you have done in a day with just one glance. Such a person doesn't need your concern, okay? Ron felt that Sherlock was right, if that person was really willing to pay, then agree. Then get the reward and split it with Sherlock. It's okay to earn money from fools. Of course, looking at the current situation, this cannot be said. However, neither Ron, who put his heart in his stomach, nor Harry and Hermione, who were overly nervous about this, did not expect that this matter would have unexpected twists and turns in the future. Just 3 days after that mysterious phone call, Hermione will come in the near future. Mainly Mr. Granger felt that her frequency of going to the Holmes family was too high and needed to be suppressed. This morning, Harry followed Sherlock home after finishing his usual morning exercise, and suddenly found a stranger standing at the door. That was a man who would leave a deep impression at first glance. Tall, with thick eyebrows and big eyes, with distinct facial features, the whole person is radiant. He was holding a black umbrella in his right hand, casually resting it on his side. His appearance looked only 18 or 19 years old, but that mature temperament gave people the feeling of being 27 or 8 years old. Seeing Sherlock and Harry, the man showed a smile. The great detective and his good friend are back? It seems that your boxing practice today went smoothly, Mr. Potter only fell once. Harry, who was still curious, felt his hair stand on end as soon as he heard the man speak. Because this was exactly the voice that had haunted him for the past 3 days. Sherlock, it's him. The person I mentioned to you.